Chapter 161. As soon as Nangongzhe finished speaking, the trees that were growing silently on both sides of the road began to shake violently. The trees had turned into trance at this moment. There were even lines that resembled faces on their trunks. Those who offend the Trant tribe, those who offend the Trant tribe, those who offend the Trant tribe. The Trants stood up one by one and said the same words. Their voices grew louder and louder in a short period of time. In the end, there was even a feeling of heaven-shaking momentum. All the Trants woke up. They slowly changed their positions and formed a battle formation with an unknown purpose, but it was filled with an iron-blooded aura. They said the same word at the same time. Kill. In an instant, the earth trembled and the clouds scattered. Even with such a terrifying momentum, Nangongzhe, who was the most direct recipient of it, was not afraid at all. Instead, his heart was filled with the desire to have a good battle. Even though his internal energy could no longer be used, it seemed to have sensed his master's soaring fighting spirit at this moment. It quickly flowed through Nangongzhe's body. The heaven's calamity sword in his hand trembled slightly and let out a series of sword cries. It wanted to tell its master that as his sword, it was also excited. A black light quietly flashed across Nangongzhe's eyes. No one noticed it. Fight! Nangongzhe held the calamity sword in his hand. He was like an army of thousands of men and horses as he rushed towards the battle formation formed by the Trants. The soaring fighting spirit seemed to be able to compete with the killing intent formed by an unknown number of Trants in an instant. Nangongzhe could not use the internal strength and sword qi in his body at this moment. He could only rely on his physical strength to wave the calamity sword in his hand again and again. However, even so, Nangongzhe's fighting strength was still very high. A rather tall Trant swung its fist, which was made of branches, towards Nangongzhe. Just as Nangongzhe was about to dodge the punch, vines quickly grew out from the ground. The vines wrapped around Nangongzhe's legs, trying to immobilize Nangongzhe. The pain caused the vines to turn slightly iron-colored. Nangongzhe knew that this vine was not something that he could break free from in a short time. You want me to take this punch head-on? So what? Why can't I face him head-on? The black light that had flashed through Nangongzhe's eyes and disappeared in an instant reappeared in Nangongzhe's eyes. Although it was still a flash, if one were to observe carefully, it would not be difficult to notice that there were traces of black light remaining in Nangongzhe's eyes. Ha! Slash! Nangongzhe roared, and the veins on his neck even appeared to be bulging. It was enough to see that Nangongzhe had used all his strength. Dong! The fist made of branches collided with Nangongzhe's heaven's disaster sword, and a wave of air was produced. Although the Trent's fist was made of branches, its hardness was enough to compete with Nangongzhe's extremely sharp heaven's disaster sword. When the two collided, Nangongzhe's heaven's disaster sword only cut 2 inches deep into the Trent's fist. Human! Prepare to die. The tall tree man seemed to feel that his punch shouldn't have only caused such a big effect, so he also shouted loudly. He added a bit of strength to his fist. Although Nangongzhe was also trying his best to resist the Trent's attack, he did not have the support of his internal strength. It was not enough to rely on pure physical strength. Under the huge force, Nangongzhe was deeply smashed into the ground. A huge pit with a radius of almost 1 meter appeared. Nangongzhe, who was in the middle of the pit, was now in an extremely sorry state. His robe was now covered in dust, and Nangongzhe's face was scratched by some of the thorns and branches on the Trent's fist. Ha ha ha. Human, do you know the power of the Trant clan? He saw Nangongzhe's sorry state. The tall Trant laughed loudly. The laughter entered Nangongzhe's ears without any hindrance, and an uncontrollable anger rose from Nangongzhe's heart. Hee, you weak human, what are you laughing at? Nangongzhe laughed for no reason, and the tall Trant was confused. He was obviously beaten up so badly, but he still laughed. This human, was really strange. Nangongzhi did not answer the tall Trent's question, and only used his hand to tear off the vine that was wrapped around his leg. Under the effect of the tall Trent's strength, the originally tenacious vines that wrapped around Nangongzhi's body had already become tattered. Whoosh! Nangongzhi's figure suddenly disappeared. Although the tall treant was curious about Nangongzhi's reaction, the disappearance of Nangongzhi's figure still made the tall treant wary. Looking around, the tall treant was obviously trying to find Nangongzhi's figure. Gotcha! A huge branch fell from the tall treant's body, and the cut was neat, which proved that it was cut by a sharp weapon. And the only sharp weapon here was the Heaven's Disaster Sword in Nangongzhi's hand. Human. What's the point of dodging? If you have the ability, then fight me head-on. The Trent's voice was obviously filled with anger. Hee, it was still the same laughter, and it carried a kind of coldness that made one's heart turn cold as it echoed around. At the same time, the sound of a branch falling to the ground could be heard. Obviously, Nangongzhi had cut off another part of the tall Trent's body. Human. 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 The angry roar reverberated around the battlefield, but there was still no response. Only the sound of hee. And the sound of branches falling could be heard from time to time. With the passage of time, the branches on the Trent's body slowly decreased. In the end, all that was left of the treant was a bare trunk. Human, after the Trent's branches were cut off, there was still a possibility of recovery. But once the most important trunk was cut off, the Trent's life would also end. Therefore, at this moment, the voice of the insufferably arrogant ant was trembling slightly. This human could really understand its own life. Hee, it was still the same laughter, but this time, it was not the Trent's branches that were cut off, but the Trent's trunk. Now, it's the rest of your turn, Nangongzhi once again said something other than hee, and at the same time, he looked at the remaining treants who were still in the battle formation. Chapter 162. The battle, or rather, it was one-sided. The massacre of an entire race by a single person continued. Nangongzhi had already stepped on countless treants. Most of the treants were directly cut in half by Nangongzhi's sword. There were also many treants that were directly dismembered by Nangongzhi, just like the tall treant at the beginning. A light green liquid flowed within the Trent's body and flowed on the ground. Unlike the taste of human blood, the Trent's juice had a faint sweet taste. This light green liquid was somewhat sticky and stuck to Nangongzhi's body. This made Nangongzhi frown. Obviously, he did not like this feeling. Bang! Nangongzhi's body shook. A burst of power erupted from his body and directly shook off the juice on his body. His clothes were once again clean. Nangongzhi slowly sheathed the Heaven's Calamity Sword in his hand. The treants were not completely wiped out. However, only a few of them were left. Seeing Nangongzhi walking towards them, the treants screamed and fled in all directions. All of this, isn't it that simple? Since they don't want to cooperate, then I'll just kill them until they do. Follow orders? Carry out missions? Exchange for tokens? Boring. Boring. Nangongzhi chuckled and ignored the few treants that had already run away. Didn't he already achieve his goal? After killing these treants, he would then obtain the Azure Dragon token that symbolized passing the stage. Where's the old treant who just called me a mere human? You should give me the token that I need. Otherwise, it's not like I can't kill the entire treant race. Nangongzhi shouted. He wanted to call out the guy who seemed to be the leader of the treants. However, only Nangongzhi's own voice could be heard in the empty forest that had lost the ents. Ah, no, it was now a plain. Not coming out? Then I'll go find you myself. Nangongzhi chuckled as if he had discovered a fun game. He walked briskly into the depths of the forest. There was no feeling of fighting at all. It was as if he was taking a leisurely stroll in the park. However, it was different from Nangong's brisk demeanor. Every time Nangong's feet touched the ground, a black aura would merge with the ground where Nangong stepped on. When the aura reached the soil, it spread like a seed. Then, the surrounding vitality was slowly devoured by the black gas released by Nangong. It didn't matter if it was a small insect, grass, or shrubs. Even the birds in the sky had lost their lives at this moment. When the birds' bodies landed on the ground, they were already entangled by a black gas. In an instant, the flesh and blood on his body had been completely corroded. At this moment, Nangong was like a messenger from hell. He had an invisible sickle, reaping the lives of the weak and insignificant people one by one. Human. Enough. The old voice sounded again. It was different from the previous disdain. It sounded angry as if it had been provoked. This time, the old voice was full of anger. It wasn't just because Nangong had slaughtered most of the lives of the Ents. More importantly, Nangong was now absorbing the vitality of the land. If the Ents died, they could continue to reproduce. If the land lost its vitality, no life could continue to survive. What Nangong was doing now was the same as cutting off the vitality of all the Ents. Oh. Now you know how to be anxious. Unlike the previous times, the old voice was illusory. This time, the old voice had a direction. Nangong immediately knew where the old voice came from. I don't know who it was. Just now, you were like a god, looking down at me from above. You want me to submit, to make me admit defeat, to make me listen to your arrangements? Now that you've seen my strength, you want me to stop? It would be great if everything in the world could be so cheap. Human, what do you want to do? When the old Ent heard Nangong's words, he couldn't help but feel panic in his heart. Although Nangong's words were biased, it was indeed what he had done. At this moment, the old Ent really couldn't figure out what Nangong wanted to do. Hasn't my goal always been very simple? It's the Azure Dragon token in your hand. Nangong laughed, as if he was mocking the Ent's intelligence. However, he quickly changed the topic. This was my initial plan. But now, I don't want to do this anymore. Your life is also mine. The old Ent didn't expect that Nangong had his eyes on his life. The conversation didn't continue. Nangong directly walked in the direction where the old Ent's voice came from. As expected, there was a huge ancient tree here. Some semi-parasitic vines were wrapped around the ancient tree. There were also a few birds that had built their own small nests on the ancient tree. If Nangong wasn't here, it would probably be a painting full of natural beauty, right? Human. My life is related to the survival of this space. Once I die, this trial space will cease to exist. Are you sure? You want to do this? A very human-like face appeared on the trunk of the ancient tree. It looked very calm. It didn't look like its life was in danger at all. Every Ent here was almost a clone of the ancient tree. The roots of the ancient tree were also closely connected to this space. Once the ancient tree was defeated, it wasn't hard to imagine whether this space would continue to exist. Oh. That's a little troublesome. I wanted to give you a quick death. Wouldn't you not have to suffer so much if I just let you die? But you have to threaten me with the survival of this space. I'm going to be the master of the blood clothing pavilion in the future. Once the space disappears, it'll be a great sin. Although Nangong's words sounded like he was reflecting on his actions, how could there be a hint of annoyance on his face? Instead, it was filled with a sense of evil. Before the ancient tree could react, Nangong had already pressed his hand on the ancient tree's trunk. The black gas that had spread out from Nangong's feet had now spread from Nangong's hand to the ancient tree's body. Since I have to keep you alive, there's no other way. I can only make you wish you were dead. Nangong smiled. His smile was so happy that it made the ancient tree's heart turn cold. Ah! 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 The ancient tree let out a violent cry. It was obvious that the black gas that Nan Gongzhi had injected into its body had taken effect. Human. Human. I'll give you a token, a token. Don't do this. No. A token engraved with an image of an azure dragon appeared in front of the ancient tree, emitting wisps of azure aura. It was obvious that the ancient tree wanted to use this token in exchange for Nan Gongzhi to stop torturing it. Nan Gongzhi picked up the token and looked at the struggling ancient tree. The vines on its body and the bird's nest had been shaken off. With a chuckle, a burst of intense light emitted from the token. Nan Gongzhi's figure instantly disappeared from this trial space. Only the ancient tree that had lived for an unknown number of years was left, still screaming in pain. Chapter 163. When Nan Gongzhi's figure appeared again, he was already on a path paved with golden dragons that were dazzling with an unparalleled presence. The azure dragon arch that Nan Gongzhi had entered was now behind Nan Gongzhi. Playing with the azure dragon token in his hand, Nan Gongzhi wanted to continue to the next arch, the water dragon arch formed by two blue dragons. However, his body stopped in a strange position. No matter how hard he tried, he could not take another step forward. He. Are you restless? Nan Gongzhi whispered softly, the black light in his eyes became brighter. With a cruel smile, Nan Gongzhi closed his eyes. What should have been a snow-white spiritual space was now filled with the color of blood and black. At some point in time, lava pools had appeared on the ground, emitting a heart-palpitating temperature. Who are you? Nan Gongzhi's body was wrapped in black chains, and he could not move at all. Opposite Nan Gongzhi, there was a person who looked exactly like Nan Gongzhi. The only difference was that Nan Gongzhi's eyes, which were not bound by the chains, were constantly emitting a black glow. Who am I? He. I am you. Can't you see? The black-eyed Nan Gongzhi stared at Nan Gongzhi, who was bound by chains, and said coldly. At the same time, he looked at his own clothes and the heaven's calamity sword that belonged to Nan Gongzhi. It was as if he was confirming that he was Nan Gongzhi. The Traiants just now were not just trees, they were living beings with thoughts and emotions. It was obvious that you could have reconciled through a proper communication, and the azure dragon token could have been obtained. However, you slaughtered the Traiants, and even after obtaining the azure dragon token, you still left a death aura in its body. You made it suffer a fate worse than death. You said you were me, but how could you be me? The more Nan Gongzhi spoke, the more intense his emotions became. At the end of his words, the anger in his eyes was about to burst out. However, the black-eyed Nan Gongzhi who was standing opposite Nan Gongzhi was not intimidated by Nan Gongzhi's anger. Instead, he was very happy to see Nan Gongzhi's anger. He even closed his eyes slightly, as if he wanted to listen to Nan Gongzhi's anger. He looked very comfortable. I am you, I am you. I did not lie to you. All of your negative emotions are my nourishment. The angrier you are, the sadder you are, and the more murderous you are. It can make me stronger and stronger. I am you, I am the one who was called Yama. Not the one who did nothing in the wood leaf, with a group of brats calling him teacher behind his back. Slaughter, blood, lamentation, these are all things that I desire, but you forcibly imprisoned me. Do you have to do something as simple as playing house? You can even let go of that bitch called Masahiro who betrayed you with a smile on her face? I was so angry, so unreconciled. But I couldn't do anything. When I reached this place, an indescribable power surged into my body. I can escape from your imprisonment. Since you can't satisfy me, then I will come out and devour you myself. You can continue to watch like this, continue to be angry and powerless. Feel what I felt at that time, feel what it was like to be imprisoned. Just like black-eyed Nan Gongzhi, black-eyed Nan Gongzhi was the integration of Nan Gongzhi's evil thoughts. It was the product of him giving up on killing and being killed all these years. It would be easier to understand the relationship between black-eyed Nangongzhe and Nangongzhe if the name was changed. Inner Demon. Black-eyed Nangongzhe was Nangongzhe's inner demon. Only with the help of an unknown power, the inner demon escaped Nangongzhe's control and became even stronger, suppressing Nangongzhe's consciousness. I can imprison you once, I can imprison you a second time, a third time, or even forever. You can do whatever you want now, but that is only temporary. Evil cannot prevail over good, you will be imprisoned by me again. Nangongzhe looked at the inner demon who was laughing wildly in front of him and said. His eyes were no longer burning with anger like before. Instead, they were very calm. It was as if the inner demon's actions could not change Nangongzhe's state of mind. He. As expected of me, you immediately calmed down after hearing the source of my power? It doesn't matter, this is just a moment of calmness. You can know all the things I do outside, and I will make you angry and sad. I am you. I know everything that you cherish and everything that you want to protect, don't I? The inner demon looked at Nangongzhe and said very seriously. The figures of Mashiro, Little Linger, and his sister Nangongzhe suddenly appeared in front of Nangongzhe's eyes. They were all tortured by their inner demons, crying and shouting, as if they were begging him to become the original Nangongzhe who lived with them. You dare! Nangongzhe knew that these were all what the inner demon wanted him to see. However, Nangongzhe was still unable to suppress his emotions, and his face had become very ferocious. These two words were forcefully squeezed out from between his teeth. His anger could not be suppressed. See, didn't I say it already? I know you, I know what will make you angry. The inner demon looked at Nangongzhe's ferocious face, reached out and grabbed Nangongzhe's hair, and forced his face to Nangongzhe's face. The black light in his eyes became even brighter, and it was filled with a gloomy aura. Just stay here and watch quietly. After saying that, he turned around and disappeared into the spiritual space that had turned black and red. Only Nangongzhe was left, his body wrapped in chains, and his eyes were filled with anger as he stared fiercely in the direction where the inner demon disappeared. On the golden dragon, Nangongzhe opened his eyes. He. It feels good to occasionally tease that despicable self of mine, however, in order to become stronger, I need more anger, sadness, and a series of negative emotions. Nangongzhe raised his head and looked at the water dragon arch in front of him. Let's see what kind of trial it is. Let me make myself angrier. Chapter 164. The arch formed by the two watercolor dragons was right in front of him. Just like the arch formed by the azure dragon at the beginning, transparent ripples shrouded the hollow of the arch. This was the second trial, the entrance to the water dragon gate. Then, let's go. Unlike the first azure dragon gate arch, after entering the water dragon gate arch, Nangongzhe was not forced to fall asleep. On the contrary, Nangongzhe remained completely clear-headed. He finally had the chance to see what the passageway to the trial space that was similar to a space-time tunnel looked like. The tunnel was so deep and empty. Whether it was light or sound, they all lost their meaning of existence here. It was like a place abandoned by the world. There was nothing. A water-colored light suddenly rushed towards Nangongzhe from the horizon. The power was very gentle, but it was impossible to resist. He could only follow the light and fly towards a place. Light. A dazzling light appeared in front of Nangongzhe. A peach-pink aura suddenly appeared around Nangongzhe. This must be the water dragon's trial, right? Not bad. You must have noticed it after passing the first trial, the azure dragon gate, right? No matter how strong your inner strength is, your foundation is the most important. Even if you lose your inner strength, as long as you have the courage to fight and face danger, you will be able to survive. You will always be able to face any difficulties. The voice of the banishment senior sounded in the space as usual, with a hint of gratification and praise. It was as if he had seen his own junior achieve great things. Sure enough, it was already planned. The corner of Nangong's mouth twitched slightly, and a somewhat mocking expression appeared on his face. In the first trial, he did not cooperate with the Ents like the banishment had planned. Instead, he slaughtered most of the Treant clansmen and even threatened the old Treant, who was the leader of the Treant clan. In the end, he left a death aura in the Elder Ent's body that was enough to torture the Elder Ent for the rest of his life. If it had been the senior Lija that Nangongja knew, he would have slashed down with his sword upon seeing his actions. What kind of praise and approval do you want? He was thinking too much. This trial is the Water Dragon Gate. Many people say that water is the most selfless thing, quietly nourishing all things. Anything that can be described as water is often praised by people. However, if I were to find something to relate to water, I would like to say that a person's desire is like water. It's seamless and unavoidable. It's so quiet that it erodes one's bones and soul. The Water Dragon Gate was a door that allowed people to face their own desires. To overcome their desires, or fall. Everything depends on your own choice. As expected, it was the banishment senior style. For all the definitions of predecessors and the public, they would always find such a slightly strange but exceptionally reasonable explanation. Water, is the existence of desire? A water-colored brilliance suddenly appeared around Nangongja's head, like a layer of gauze surrounding his head. Waves of cool feeling continuously entered Nangongja's brain from the outside world. Discovering desire depends on scanning a person's memory? But, this memory doesn't belong to me. I wonder what kind of trial of desire it will be. Nangongja murmured softly. That's right. Although his body was still Nangongja's body, it had already been controlled. However, the control was already in the hands of Nangongja's inner demon. Nangongja might not be able to see through Nangongja's desire, but it was nothing to the inner demon. It could be said that the difficulty of this trial was even lower than the first trial, the Green Dragon Gate. When the brilliance dissipated, Nangongja appeared in an ordinary courtyard. Whether it was the style of the building or the plants in the courtyard, it looked very similar to the place built by Mashiro in the Lion Clan's alternate dimension. Nangongja looked around, his eyes flickering with a black light. This is Nangongja's desire? It's really a simple desire. Originally, I was still thinking about how to give Nangongja the greatest emotional stimulation. Now, isn't an opportunity directly placed in front of me? The door of the courtyard was opened, and Nangongro was standing behind it. She looked at Nangongja, who was standing outside the door in a daze, and pursed her lips slightly. She walked up to Nangongja and lightly knocked on his head. Stupid brother, what are you doing? You're already at the door, but you're still standing outside like a fool. Although there was a hint of reproach in her tone, her actions were very gentle. It didn't sound like a reproach, but more like a spoiled child. Nangongja's mental space was still covered in black and red. However, Nangongja, who was wrapped in chains, called out his sister's nickname. That's right, Nangongja could actually sense everything that was happening in the outside world. This was done on purpose by Nangongja's inner demon. It had completely eroded Nangongja's mental space. In order to allow Nangongja to have more intense mental fluctuations, it deliberately allowed Nangongja to sense everything that was happening in the outside world. At this moment, Nangongro, who appeared in front of the inner demon, also appeared in front of Nangongja. It's just that Nangongja could only be like a bystander, he couldn't do anything, he could only watch his sister welcome the inner demon into the door. After that, Nangongja also saw Mashiro and Little Linger. These people seemed to have nothing to do with the shinobi world anymore, they just moved to this small house in the Lion Clan space and lived a simple and comfortable life. This may be Nangongja's greatest expectation for his future, for his life. Although it was a fantasy, a trial. But Nangongja still yearned for such a life. But the words of the inner demon still echoed in Nangong's ears. The people I cherish the most. Make me angry, make me sad. Nangongja didn't know what the inner demon wanted to do. But he could still guess a little bit. Originally, the inner demon used his sister and his family to threaten him. If he wanted to make more anger and sadness in his heart, wasn't this the best opportunity for the inner demon to do so? That's how people are. Even if they know that everything in front of them is an illusion, they still regard it as reality. In this way, they are tested and tortured by the illusory reality. Just like Nangongja now. Chapter 165. Very good. Is everyone here? Nangongja, who was being controlled by his inner demon, looked at the three people in front of him. They were his sister Nangongro, Mashiro, who had been with him for a long time, and little Linger, who he had watched grow up, and suddenly said such a strange sentence. Nangongja's face also showed an indescribable evil expression. Oni-san, what are you talking about? What do you mean everyone is here? Didn't we live here after the trouble in the shinobi world? Who else can be here besides us? Nangongro heard her brother's strange words, and she couldn't understand what her brother meant. So she asked. It's nothing, but since everyone is here, I have some questions to ask everyone. Nangongja smiled, but his smile made Mashiro, little Linger, and Nangongro, who were beside him, feel a chill in their hearts. Oni-san. What are you doing? Why are you smiling so strangely? Nangongro couldn't help but ask. Hee, Nangongja smiled, and his body suddenly erupted with an extremely powerful aura. Unlike in the Azure Dragon Gate, Nangongja's internal force at this moment can exert its original effect. After all, the purpose of this stage was to allow the participants to face their own desires. Strength and whatnot were secondary. So his internal force wasn't forcibly sealed. Along with the release of his aura, there was also a huge force. Even Nangongro, who was the strongest among the three girls, couldn't match Nangongja's strength. The three girls who were closest to him fell to the ground with their butts under the influence of the huge force. Oni-san, Nangongro wanted to say something, but Nangongja stared fiercely. All the words that were about to come out of his mouth were forcibly swallowed back down. Noisy. Nangongja walked in front of little Linger with a smile on his face. Little Linger, Nangongja gently called the youngest girl among the three girls, just like how he always called her. However, the coldness and indifference in his eyes frightened little Linger. Little Linger, I didn't teach you anything. When someone calls your name, should you respond properly? Nangongja glanced at little Linger, who was sitting on the ground, and spoke to little Linger like a strict teacher. Then, he shouted fiercely. Answer me. Little Linger's eyes were instantly filled with tears. The terrified little Linger could only stutter out. Nangong. Big brother, and that's a good girl. Big brother wants to ask little Linger a question. Without waiting for little Linger to respond, Nangongja continued, Little Linger, do you know how annoying you are? Annoying? The big brother that she had always relied on hated her. Little Linger's heart was instantly filled with such thoughts. Even the voice that was originally choked with sobs instantly stopped. She just stared blankly at Nangongja's face. That year, your grandfather, that old guy A Wang, saved my life. I also know that I have to repay the debt of saving my life. So even though I was a little unwilling, I still took you with me. All these years, I have taken care of you very seriously, right? You said that you wanted to be a ninja, so I painstakingly taught you. Even after you entered the school, you went to Kiba Ninja School and became a boring teacher. But what about you? That lousy talent, and an attitude of having nothing to do. When you were in the ninja school, if it weren't for me, the higher-ups of the ninja school would still let you stay in the school for my sake. When will you become a ninja? Even if you become a ninja, you still have a silly look. Have you ever thought about how embarrassing you have made me? Little Linger listened to her brother's words. The mist in her eyes suddenly turned into tears, and streaked across her slightly immature face. Is this the method that the demon came up with to torture Nangongja? In this way, the demon mercilessly broke the bond between Nangongja and his family. Oh. Even with this, there are still no fluctuations. Looks like Little Ling, isn't that important in my original body's heart. Feeling its own power, the heart demon found that the conversation with Ling, did not stimulate its own emotions as much as the original body. He was slightly disappointed, but it didn't affect him. He just looked at Mashiro and Nangong-ro, who were still suppressed by his power. These two were the ones who could really increase his power. Nangong-ro and Mashiro's dark history was not small at all. Without looking at Little Linger, Nangongja stood up. He walked in front of Mashiro. When he walked to Mashiro's side, Nangongja had already grabbed Mashiro's hair. He pulled Mashiro up, and the pain from his scalp made Mashiro cry out in pain. Mashiro? Kong? Nangongja called out Mashiro's code name in root, and his eyes were full of violence. You are the first person who betrayed me among my closest people. Ha, that gentle appearance of yours is really good at hiding your true intentions. But I am a cultivator who has inner strength, and my 5 senses are sharp. Do you think I don't know about your little tricks at home? Every day, you would write down your observation of me on a scroll. These things must have been in the hands of Root, right? How dare you? How dare you? I was worried about your life, so I didn't hesitate to fall out with Danzo. The prestige that Konoha had built up over the years went down the drain, and now it has reached the point where it is impossible to return to Konoha. But what about you? But when I rescued you, you stabbed me without any hesitation? Who gave you the courage, and who made you believe that I would forgive you? Mashiro looked at Nangongja, who was questioning him, and his eyes were wide open. He was also immersed in his own regret for betraying Nangongja. Tears flowed down his face, and he muttered, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, enough. In the mind of the demon, there was a sudden roar. You can't hold it in anymore? The demon looked at Nangong-ro, who was the last person he hadn't questioned. This person who was closest to Nangongja was the one who could trigger all the negative emotions in Nangongja's heart. These were just 2 appetizers before the main course, but it was enough to make his main body angry. Haha, how boring. Chapter 166. Nangongja's lips curled into a smile. In the end, his main body was still too simple and pure. Just by using words to provoke him, he had already become so angry. It was clearly just a pile of tears from the shadows of the people close to him. He had actually started to lose control of his emotions bit by bit. He hadn't even started the main act yet. Nangongja looked at his younger sister, who had been with him for almost all of his life. Who knew how many ups and downs, big and small, Nangong-ro. Nangongja. Nangong-ro. Nangong, looking at Nangong-ro, Nangongja called out their names. This so-called Nangong, is it really my surname? Or is this a surname that I don't know who forced it on me? Looking at her brother, Nangong-ro's eyes were wide open. It was obvious that she had been exposed to some facts that she didn't want to face. From the moment I had my memories, I already didn't have you. My dear younger sister calls me Nangongja. I also have the rich inner strength that you call our grandfather and passed on to me in order to protect our lives, as well as this heavenly tribulation sword of extraordinary origin. Do you know that when I was still unable to control the inner strength in my body? Every day at midnight, the inner strength in my body would go berserk. It would wander around my meridians without restraint. How much do you know about the pain of my meridians being torn apart? Our lives were very difficult. Every day, we ate the cheapest ingredients. Many times, we even had to rely on the help of our neighbors and Uncle Chimu from the blacksmith shop to survive. In order to let you, my younger sister, have a better life. I could only go to the small forest behind the house every day and rely on the true intent of the sword Tao that I felt from the tribulation sword to practice sword techniques. Practicing swordsmanship will stimulate the internal energy in my body. After midnight, it will make me suffer even more. Finally, I joined the Woodleaf Ninja village that I had always dreamed of. But what are ninjas? To put it nicely, they are a group of people who have great strength and stand at the top of the world. But to put it bluntly, aren't ninjas just killing machines controlled by money? For our life, so that you, my sister, can live a more stable life. I could only hold the heavenly calamity sword and walk on the edge of death time and time again. In order to keep you away from death, I had to think of a way to send you to the Kiba hospital with the lowest risk factor. Injured again and again, staining my hands with blood again and again. I'll tell myself that I'm fighting so hard for my sister. But you know what? As my strength increased, more and more scenes of our childhood appeared in my mind, which were different from what you said about us. In these images, I have my father, my mother, and my grandfather, but I don't see you. Presumably, the grandfather you speak of didn't think that one day, I would be able to cultivate to the point where my spiritual power could break through the seal he set, right? I saw it. My father, my mother, everything I knew, the place I grew up in, disappeared without a trace in the fire and massacre. I was tearfully stuffed into the cellar of my own home by my mother. What echoed in my ears were the last cries of the passing of life. The surrounding air was so hot, I knew that there was a raging fire around me. But I could only cover my mouth like this, not even daring to cry out. Finally, when all the sounds outside returned to silence. With my own hands, I dug away the dirt and ashes that covered the cellar door. I told myself again and again, I want to live. I want to live and find those who made me lose everything. I want to take revenge on them. Then, I lost consciousness. But I faintly saw two people, an old man and a little girl. Tell me, who are the two of them? Who was the one who covered up my memories? Who was the one who brought the baptism of war to my remote village that stood aloof from worldly affairs? Who was it? Who was it? I don't know how many times I thought about it, but in the end, I realized that it was the two of them. My closest sister, the girl called Nangong Ro, and the grandfather she spoke of. Nangongja looked at Nangong Ro, but his tone didn't fluctuate at all. Even though he was talking about his childhood memories that were covered up, his tone was still as cold as ever. It was as if he was talking about a story that had nothing to do with him, but the black light in his eyes was shining brighter. Actually, Nangongja had always known this. Since his strength increased day by day, more and more memory fragments would appear in Nangongja's mind through the seal. However, Nangongja had never mentioned it. In fact, Nangongja was very afraid. He was very afraid that his current life would no longer exist. Therefore, Nangongja chose to escape and chose to ignore all possible guesses. He only wanted to use the name Nangongja and continue living with his sister, Mashiro, and little Linger. These were the things that Nangongja was most unwilling to touch. Nangongja was very clear that the Nangong Ro, Mashiro, and little Linger in front of him were all illusions created by the trial. However, his inner demon's questions were also questions to Nangongja. These sharp questions were like sharp blades that were gouging Nangongja's heart. Nangongja had already lost control of his body. He could only watch as his sister, Mashiro, and little Linger sat in front of him. They were either crying, blaming themselves, or not saying a word. Inner demon. Inner demon. Inner demon. Get over here, get over here. Nangongja roared. Nangongja roared. However, the inner demon seemed to be unaware and had already slowly pulled out the heaven's calamity sword. What did the inner demon want to do? The Heaven's Calamity Sword's edge was already on Nangong Ro's white neck. The slight friction caused the Heaven's Calamity Sword to leave a bloody mark on Nangong Ro's neck. Was this inner demon trying to kill his sister? No, it wasn't just his sister. There was also Mashiro and Little Linger. The inner demon wouldn't let any of them go. Even if the Nangong Ro, Mashiro, and Little Linger here were all illusions, Nangongja was still unwilling to watch them die. He had to do something. Chapter 167. Feeling his growing power, Nangongja knew that his original body was on the verge of collapse. And the method to completely destroy his original body was so simple. He only needed to gently swing his sword 3 times to end the 3 phantoms in front of him that couldn't even be considered as living beings. It was really too simple, wasn't it? To be tied down by these meaningless emotions, to let your sword be covered with rust by these useless people. Such a body is so useless that I can't stand it anymore. Since you're so useless, why don't you let me replace you? Whether it's the name of Yama or the sharpness of the Heaven's Calamity Sword, let me properly display their power. Nangongja raised the Heaven's Calamity Sword in his hand that had already been unsheathed. The blade's sharpness was getting closer and closer to Nangong Ro's neck. 3 inches, 2 inches, 1 inch, 1 inch. When the blade was about to touch Nangong Ro's neck, it stopped. Just a little bit more, and Nangong Ro's life would be gone. But at this moment, Nangongja's eyes no longer had the black light that was controlled by the inner demon, nor did they have the usual brilliance. Instead, they became very lifeless, as if his body no longer belonged to anyone. What are you doing? Just a little bit more, just a little bit more. The inner demon looked at Nangongja, who was tightly bound by the black chains in front of him, and his face became very ferocious. Clearly, as long as he waved his sword, he could take away Nangong Ro's life. Let his original body completely collapse, let him completely control Nangongja's body. But the inner demon was once again pulled back into the spiritual space by an incomprehensible force. Clearly, I've already completely controlled the body, and you've been suppressed by me to such a state. How did you pull me into this space? Nangongja should be at a disadvantage right now. Whether it was the black chains on his body or the completely changed color of his spiritual space, they all proved that Nangongja was at a disadvantage. However, Nangongja had a gentle smile on his face, as if everything was not that bad. Indeed, you are very powerful. You've used your power to completely control my physical body and spiritual space. Nangongja raised his head and looked at the ferocious face of his inner demon. Everything you've said, everything you've done, is known to me. These were all things I didn't want to talk about, because once the truth was revealed, I wouldn't say it out loud. Then everything I love and cherish will cease to exist. Even though the one outside is an illusion of my sister, Mashiro, and Little Linger, I'm not sure if it's real or not. But their emotions, their memories, and their thoughts are all girls that I love and cherish. It's you who made me see the price I have to pay after revealing the truth. You must have felt my mixed feelings of anger, sadness, and powerlessness at that time, right? But these feelings are not because of those 3 girls, but because of my anger, sadness, and powerlessness. It's because I'm not strong enough. It's because I let you take control of my body. It's all because I'm too weak. When the inner demon heard Nangongja's words and realized that his original body was blaming himself, the expression on his face was extremely rich. He was the one who did all these things. His original body's sadness, anger, and powerlessness were the most exquisite metals that should belong to him. But now, his original body was telling him that these did not belong to him? What a joke! Ah, it's indeed your fault. You cared about these meaningless things. You gave Little Linger tolerance, gave Mashiro forgiveness, and gave Nangong Ro love. These things have made you so weak. These things made you fall into your current situation. Where's the viciousness you had when you killed people, Where's the wit you had when you and those ninjas schemed against each other? Where's the aura you had when you were called Yama? Just because of these 3 women, you've become so weak. You became a weak existence that only knows how to blame yourself and feel sorry for yourself. Since you can't be Yama, you're not worthy of this heaven's calamity sword. Why don't you let me replace you and become the Yama that should have made everyone tremble? Nangongja had not yet become agitated, but the inner demon was already speaking more and more passionately. You're right. I don't have the viciousness I had in the past. I don't have the mood to scheme against each other, and I don't have the aura to directly take the lives of those who stand in my way. But, did this really make me weaker? No, it's the opposite. I feel that after I threw away these things, I've truly become who I should be. After I took in little Linger, I gained innocence. After I forgave Mashiro, I gained freedom. When I saw Ruru as my family, I gained the meaning of life. These things were never meaningless trash. To me, these are the meaning of my battle. The more Nangongja spoke, the more resolute his heart became. What was an inner demon? It was a hole in one's heart. Everyone would more or less have an inner demon. It was just that Nangongja's inner demon, for unknown reasons, suddenly escaped from Nangongja's control. The inner demon also knew that it had to directly cause its original body to collapse in order to truly become an independent entity. This was why it repeatedly challenged Nangongja's bottom line in these 2 trials. But now, Nangongja seemed to have seen through its confusion and actually began to slowly gain control of the spiritual space. You're just one of my prisoners now. What's the point of saying so many righteous words? I'll let you have a good look at my power. The inner demon's agitation also caused a change in the spiritual space. The sky and the surrounding areas covered in blood and black began to emit a black and red light. The magma pools on the ground also began to boil. It pulled out the calamity sword in its hand, as if it wanted to slash at Nangongja. Nangongja raised his head and looked at the inner demon in front of him, who had already gone mad and turned into a demon. Its eyes were filled with disdain and ridicule, as if it was looking at its disobedient poodle. Whose sword do you think you're holding in your hand? Chapter 168. When the inner demon heard Nangongja's words, he didn't say anything. Instead, he looked at the heaven's calamity sword in his hand. Doesn't it belong to whoever has the sword? The heaven's calamity sword is indeed very intelligent, but in the end, it's still a sword. Do you think it can run to the hands of the owner who let it collect dust? If the heaven's calamity sword really does have a consciousness, it will definitely choose me to be its owner. When he heard the inner demon's confident words, Nangongja's smile became even wider. You shouldn't be making your own assumptions about who it will choose. Isn't it better to let the heaven's calamity sword choose? Let the heaven's calamity sword choose? Just based on. The inner demon was just about to mock his main body for looking at a sword as if it was a person. But at this moment, the heaven's calamity sword in the inner demon's hand began to tremble slightly. The sword's cries echoed in the surroundings, as if it had really come to life. Look, the heaven's calamity sword can still make its own choice, right? Nangongja looked at the inner demon, as if he was sure he would win. However, the inner demon wasn't someone who could be easily fooled. Whether it was in terms of IQ or EQ, the inner demon and Nangongja were almost the same. The heaven's calamity sword definitely wouldn't have its own consciousness. In this world, there had never been any item that had the ability to think for itself. Then, what caused the heaven's calamity sword to act so strangely? One had to know that he was in a spiritual space that was already under his control. All illusion tricks had nowhere to hide in front of him. Wait, spiritual space? Could it be that you? Impossible, impossible. This spiritual space is completely under my control. With your current state, How can you break free from my restraints and regain control of this spiritual space? The inner demon still spoke his conjecture. Although the inner demon didn't want to believe it, this was already the most likely answer he knew. Looking at the black chains wrapped around Nangong's body, these chains evolved from a part of the inner demon's power. All of Nangong's movements would be transmitted to his consciousness through the chains. He clearly didn't feel anything, so Nangongja couldn't break free from the chain's restraints. You and I are of the same origin. Although you've inexplicably received an unknown power, you're still a part of me. These chains. Nangongja looked at the chains wrapped around his body, and slowly began to stand up from his originally paralyzed state. An icy blue light suddenly burst out from Nangongja's body, and began to attack the chain's restraints. The inner demon trusted the black chains very much, but in an instant, the light from Nangongja's body pierced through them. The chains were clearly very sturdy, but they were like paper. As soon as Nangongja raised his arm, they were broken. At the same time, the entire spiritual space began to drizzle. The drizzle was very small, but very dense. It even had a similar color to the light from Nangongja's body. When the drizzle touched the black and red that covered the entire spiritual space, the black and red were instantly washed away. The lava pools on the ground were also extinguished by the drizzle. I don't accept this. I don't accept this. I don't accept this. What I did was what you thought deep in your heart. I only did what you didn't dare to do normally according to your wishes. Why should I lose to a hypocrite like you? If you didn't have any dark thoughts, if you didn't have a trace of evil, if you didn't have any evil intentions, I wouldn't exist. You would never, never be able to destroy me. Because I am you. Unless you die, I will never be banished. The inner demon was also in the drizzle. Every drizzle that touched the inner demon's body caused wisps of smoke to rise from his body. It was like the smoke from a fire that was poured with water. The inner demon couldn't withstand such power. He wailed, he roared, he scolded his original body for being hypocritical and his own greatness. Dark thoughts? Evil thoughts? I've never denied these things. Just like what you said, these things are a part of me since I was born. As long as I'm alive, these thoughts will continue to appear. They can't be killed, and they can't be destroyed. So, I choose to accept them. I don't think I'm a person filled with kindness. I only forgive people that I'm willing to forgive. Kill people? Torture people? It's not like I haven't done it before. The inner demon looked at the original body standing in front of him, who looked exactly like him, and said these words softly. You want to assimilate me? Yes, the inner demon knew that this was the purpose of his original body. He wanted to merge his kindness and evil thoughts again, instead of suppressing his evil thoughts like in the past. I don't want to. It wasn't easy for me to escape from your control and have my own independent thoughts and consciousness. Now, you want me to merge with you again by saying that you're willing to tolerate me? I refuse. I refuse. Nangongja looked at the incarnation of his evil thoughts, the inner demon. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. After all, the inner demon was created by himself. The so-called mysterious external force was actually just to advance the growth of the inner demon. He had to face this problem in the end. Nangongja waved his hand, and the catastrophe sword in the inner demon's hand was already in Nangongja's hand. He waved the long sword in his hand, and his mental strength was also mobilized along with the long sword. Shwa! 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 There were 4 consecutive sounds of the air being cut through, and 4 invisible barriers rose in the spiritual space that had returned to its original white and flawless appearance, imprisoning the inner demon. Nangongja took a deep look at his inner demon. He opened his mouth several times, but didn't know what to say. He could only silently shake his head, turn around, and leave the spiritual space. He regained control of his body. looking at Mashiro, Nangong-ro, and Little Linger, who were in a daze in front of him. Even Nangongja didn't know what to say, although they were all illusions formed by this trial space. However, everything seemed so real. Ruru, Mashiro, Little Linger, Nangongja gently called the names of the three girls, but the three girls were in a daze and didn't respond at all. He could only gently wave his sleeves, and a burst of mental strength instantly gushed out, directly bursting the illusion formed by the trial space. This was the improvement Nangongja had obtained after the crisis of the heart demon. Everything around him returned to its original state. It was a deep and empty space. Only a token carved with exquisite dragon patterns and surrounded by water aura was floating in front of Nangongja. Chapter 169. Nangongja once again stood on the back of the golden dragon. Unlike before, when his inner demon seized control of his body, Nangongja had completely returned to his original appearance. This time, what appeared in front of Nangongja was a door arch formed by two crimson dragons. Without hesitation, Nangongja took a step into the cave. Perhaps it was because of his previous experience. Nangongja only wanted to pass through these levels as soon as possible. Then, he would return to the Lion Clan's alternate space and take a good look at Nangong-ro, Mashiro, and Little Linger. After this thought appeared in Nangongja's mind, it could not be dispersed. Congratulations, you have reached the third level. You have seen through the things you are obsessed with. No matter if it's your soul or your body, both have reached an indescribable level of improvement. We live in this world, we will experience all kinds of things and meet all kinds of people. We will be happy, but we will also be hurt. You have the skills and temperament. Can you bear the pain? I am very curious. This crimson dragon door is to test how much pain you can endure. In front of you, there is a path. It is filled with flames that can burn both the body and the soul. No matter how far you can go, you will obtain the crimson dragon token. All of this is related to your choice. Senior Lija's voice rang out as usual, explaining the stages to everyone who challenged him. No matter how far I can go, I will obtain the token for this level? Nangongja did not think too much and directly stepped on the path in front of him, which was burning with golden flames for some reason. When his first step landed, he felt a burning sensation on the bottom of his feet. But that was it. With Nangongja's willpower, he was able to endure the pain. Second step, third step, with every step, the burning sensation Nangongja endured became more and more intense. The air around him became hotter and hotter, and waves of pain came from his head. Was this the soul-burning flame that Banishment Senior mentioned? Countless flames rose up, like a dancer who had not danced for a long time and heard his favorite music. It constantly jumped and swayed. Nangongja did not have too many distracting thoughts. He just walked forward step by step. A flame suddenly rose up and touched Nangongja's robe. Nangongja's consciousness was a little blurred at this moment. He did not notice that his robe was on fire. Robe was made of ordinary materials, it was unavoidable that it started to burn. After a while, his robe was burned, it was a beggar's robe. Nangongja's skin began to be exposed under the threat of the flames. His skin began to turn black. If he sniffed carefully, he might even be able to smell the pungent smell of burnt flesh. Time gradually passed, and the flames around Nangongja began to burn higher and higher. Nangongja was now almost drowned in the flames. Besides the pain, Nangongja could not feel anything. He just walked forward like a machine. Suddenly, a sentence appeared in Nangongja's mind. No matter how far you can go, you will receive the Scarlet Dragon token. No matter how far I can go, I will receive the token. That's right. Banishment's words appeared in Nangongja's mind again. Was it enough? Was it enough for him to reach this point? He was really in pain. His mental power and physical strength were at their weakest. There were 5 levels here, and he had only passed the 3rd one. There were 2 more levels that were more difficult than this one waiting for him. Should he give up? Should he give up so that he could have a higher chance of passing the remaining levels? Anyway, he had already come so far. He could definitely get the token for this level. Why should he not give up? His goal was to pass the levels and become the head of the Blood Garment Pavilion. He did not have to pass these levels perfectly. Why should he not give up? Give up, it was enough for now, he could definitely get the token. Why should he suffer like this? However, even if Nan Gongzhi was hesitating, his footsteps never stopped. It was as if there was a voice in his heart telling him that he should never give up. The original scarlet flames with a little bit of gold had turned into a completely golden flame. The heavenly calamity sword in his hand had also lost its usual coolness. It was now burning hot from the flames. Sword? A swordsman would rather break than bend. The sword is the courage of the person who wields it. As long as you still hold the sword in your hand, as long as you still have your sword in your heart, you should face all dangers. Then, you should be brave enough to face all dangers. Our lives are destined to be filled with thorns. Some people rely on their wisdom, and some rely on tricks to get through the dangers. However, your sword will tell you that you don't need to use such methods. The sword in your hand is the best way to face everything. These words were so righteous that it was impossible to refute. It sounded so good, but did it really have any practical meaning? However, who was the one who said these words? It seemed to be the senior from the banishment who had already started persuading people to give up at the beginning of the level. Misdirection? Nan Gongzhi vaguely guessed the meaning of the banishment's words at the beginning of the level. What test the pain, what could be given up? It was all nonsense. If he really gave up, it would be impossible to pass this level. This level was supposed to test whether a person's heart was firm or not. Go. I must walk to the end. Even if I can't pass the remaining 2 levels, even if I may not be able to become the head of the Blood Garment Pavilion, Nan Gongzhi still wanted to pass the level. These flames were, in fact, the best companion for tempering one's temperament. If he could really persevere to the end, then the problem of the heart demon would be much easier to solve. Whether it was the Blood Garment Pavilion or the head of the Blood Garment Pavilion. The most important thing was to improve his own strength. Raging fire to forge true gold. This was the key to the Scarlet Dragon Door. Nan Gongzhi continued to move forward, even if his feet no longer listened to him. He would use his own hands to crawl forward bit by bit. Even if his hands could no longer exert any strength, he would use his own body to move forward bit by bit. Chapter 170. At this moment, Nan Gongzhi had already lost consciousness. Just how far had he walked on this burning path? Nan Gongzhi didn't know at all. In fact, if there was another bystander, it wouldn't be difficult to see that this so-called straight path of flames was actually in the shape of a circle. It was just that because of the cover of the flames and the misdirection of the trial, it made people think that it was actually a straight path. It was a path with no end, and it could only keep going in circles. A token with a fiery red halo floated in front of Nan Gongzhi's forehead. Although the light was very weak, it covered the surrounding golden flames. A brilliance surged from the token, and instantly spread to Nan Gongzhi's entire body. Nan Gongzhi's body, along with the brilliance, turned into a stream of light and was teleported out of the trial space. Nan Gongzhi was lying on the back of the golden dragon. A gust of wind that came out of nowhere brushed past Nan Gongzhi's ear. It woke Nan Gongzhi up. Ever since I entered this trial, I've been in a coma. If I didn't know that I was the only one in this trial space, would really be worried about my own safety. With a bitter smile on his face, Nan Gongzhi made fun of himself. After checking his body, Nan Gongzhi found that no matter if it was his robe or his skin, there were no traces of being burned by the flames on the path of the Scarlet Dragon Gate. Although he couldn't figure out what was going on, Nangongzhi was no longer in the mood to think about his clothes. This was because Nangongzhi was holding the Crimson Dragon token that was burning in his hand at the moment. Azure Dragon, Water Dragon, Scarlet Dragon. These things belong to wood, water, and fire of the 5 elements. If I'm not mistaken, this earthen yellow dragon in front of me represents the power of earth, one of the 5 elements, right? But there are only 4 arches here. Where did the remaining metal element trial come from? Nangongzhi took out the 3 tokens that he had already obtained, and began to slowly think about the problem of this trial space. After all, there was a checkpoint in front of him that he needed to break through. It wouldn't be too late to say these words after he had passed through the Earth Dragon Gate arch, right? The 2 earth-colored dragons faced each other and looked down with their big eyes. Nangongzhi stepped into the archway. Unlike before, when Nangongzhi arrived at a place similar to a spatial crevice, when he stepped into the arch of the Earth Dragon Gate, he had already arrived at the real trial space. This should be a cave. The air was slightly damp and musty. It seemed that the ventilation wasn't that good. Inside the walls of the cave, there were oil lamps that were ignited by an unknown source. Although the light wasn't that bright, it was still enough to illuminate the dark cave. Nangongzhi stretched out his hand to touch the wall that was relatively close to him. A trace of moist and cool feeling came from his fingers. The first trial started with battle. The second trial was to break through obsession. The third trial was to walk through fire. It's really tough. The voice of the senior banishment came again. However, Nangongzhi felt that the senior's voice was starting to become weaker with every banishment. In the first trial, the senior spoke like an observer and judge. But now, the tone of his voice had a bit of annoyance. It was like a person reading a script. At the beginning, he felt that he was very good at what he said, so he read it very seriously. But the more he read, the more he found that the words he said were the same, so he didn't want to read anymore. I say, Senior Banishment, you really didn't come up with these words, right? If it was the Senior Banishment that he was familiar with, if he were to say these words, the Senior Banishment would have torn the script to pieces the moment it reached his hands. Then, he would say, reading this kind of thing, I might as well go drink to my heart's content, and disappear. Sure enough, when the Senior Banishment helped the Blood Clothing Pavilion build this trial space, he was still young. He hadn't had time to awaken his strange attribute yet. These words are really boring. Okay. Trial taker, follow the passage and you will find a picture. I drew it myself. As long as you can understand the things within the stipulated time, you will be able to pass this earthen dragon trial. As expected. His nature was exposed, right? Exposed, right? When Nangongzhi heard the Senior Banishment's lazy voice, for the first time, he felt that the Senior Banishment he knew was really the person he knew. Picture? I wonder what kind of painting Senior Lizhe will be able to draw with his own hands. Thinking about it, he was even a little bit interested. Nangongzhi walked all the way into the cave. At first, Nangongzhi was still on guard against any traps or beasts that would suddenly appear along the way to prevent him from reaching the depths of the cave. But after walking for a long time, he found that there were no abnormalities. Nangongzhi put the Heaven's Calamity sword back into his scabbard. The first few checkpoints were indeed not easy to pass. With Nangongzhi's temperament and strength, it was very difficult for him to pass. This also proved that Senior Lizhe had put in a lot of effort in designing these trials. But now, there were no obstacles at all in this stage. This was not a good thing. This proved that the Senior Banishment had great confidence in the picture he left behind. He was confident that it was enough to surpass the difficulty of the first 3 stages. Losing inner strength, being trapped, and burning the soul and body were all not as difficult as this picture. What's inside? Nangongzhi fiddled with his mouth. He was also thinking about what kind of picture the senior banishment had left behind. With the senior banishment's temperament, he probably would not seriously learn how to draw. Naturally, he did not want people to understand the creative ideas behind the picture scroll. What was the senior banishment's best at? Alcohol tolerance? Or the way of the sword? If he was not wrong, it should be something related to the sword. Then, what was inside the picture? Sword moves? Sword intent? No matter what it was, since the senior banishment was confident that it could stump the participants who had reached this stage, it must be very difficult. He. Whether it's sword moves or sword intent, let me take a good look. The senior banishment's gift to the Blood Robe Pavilion. Chapter 171. Speaking of which, the crypt wasn't very long. After a while, Nangongzhi had reached the deepest part of the crypt. There was a small space in the depths of the crypt. There was only a stone table and a stone stool. A scroll painting was placed on the stone table. This. Compared to the previous 3 levels, this is a little shabby. Compared to the previous 3 levels, which had huge forests, realistic illusions, and endless paths covered in flames, the simple crypt space here was very shabby and rustic. Nangongzhi's gaze drifted to the scroll painting on the stone table. This must be the painting that senior banishment mentioned, right? He walked step by step to the side of the stone table and sat down on the stone stool. Nangongzhi reached out and held the scroll painting in his hand. A different aura escaped from the scroll painting, bringing with it an iron-blooded and murderous aura as it charged towards Nangongzhi. Sure enough, the scroll painting left behind by senior banishment wasn't something ordinary. Nangongzhi unfolded the scroll painting in his hand. The aura of iron and blood and murderous aura was finally released and rushed towards him. This so-called painting wasn't really a painting. It was just a simple ink mark, as if it was casually waved by a person. Is this the painting that senior banishment mentioned? It's really simple. Nangongzhi slightly ridiculed the banishment painting and looked at the ink mark. However, he didn't feel anything at all. It was just like a simple painting. Just as Nangongzhi looked at the ink mark, a decaying aura was constantly emitted from the bottom of the scroll painting. The pure white paper quickly turned yellow under the influence of the decaying aura, then slowly turned dark brown. It was as if it had been weathered for a long time and was even slowly decomposing. Is this the so-called time limit? Either I can comprehend the true meaning of this ink mark in time, or the scroll painting will directly decay and disappear. And then fail the challenge? Nangongzhi finally understood how the time limit mentioned by the senior banishment was achieved. He tried to inject his internal energy into the scroll, but the scroll didn't react at all. It was just like an ordinary scroll. Not inner force? Nangongzhi murmured to himself. Since it was impossible to discover the secrets within the scroll with the naked eye, there must be some sort of key that would allow people to discover the secrets within the scroll. Inner force or spiritual force? He then tried to attach his mental power to the scroll. The gentle mental power quickly permeated into every tiny structure of the scroll. There was still no reaction. By the time Nangongzhi tested the 2 powers, a third of the scroll had already been corroded by the decaying aura. There were also many places that had already dissipated. Banishment. Tribulation sword. Sword. Sword chi. Nangongzhi thought hard for a long time, but he seemed to have forgotten the most important thing. That was the sword that the senior banishment was most fond of. Wasn't sword chi the most closely related to swords? But could such a fragile piece of paper really withstand the tyrannical sword chi? Nangongzhi didn't know, but Nangongzhi could only think of such a choice. He had no choice but to inject a very small amount of sword chi into the scroll painting. What was sword chi? It was a type of energy that mainly attacked and killed. Although Nangongzhi only used a very small amount of sword qi, the effect was very significant. The sword qi and the decaying aura that was originally corroding the scroll suddenly formed a different kind of connection. The decaying aura became denser under the stimulation of the sword qi, and the sword qi seemed to feel that it had to fight against the decaying aura. It constantly devoured the decaying aura to nourish itself, becoming stronger and stronger. This is really, looking at the scroll painting that was corroding faster, Nangongzhi only wanted to knock his head hard. Why did he suddenly think of injecting sword qi into it? What else? What else was the most closely related to the banishment senior? If it wasn't a sword, then what was the favorite thing of the banishment senior? The thing that the senior banishment senior liked, wine? Good wine? The drunken immortal wine in the green jade gourd that the senior banishment senior gave him? Although the choice of wine was a bit of a joke, at this moment, the scroll painting was corroding faster and faster, and Nangongzhi didn't have time to think about the mystery calmly. Nangongzhi took off the green jade gourd on his back and used his mouth to bite open the cork that sealed the gourd. He directly sprinkled the wine on the scroll painting. This was Nangongzhi's last attempt. It was also the last possible attempt that Nangongzhi could make to pass this level. The wine slowly soaked the ink. In just a moment, the ink had turned from black to a blood-red color. Even this works? Nangongzhi was just trying to make a last resort by sprinkling the drunken immortal wine on the scroll painting. He didn't expect it to actually work. As expected. This level is really more difficult than the previous ones. Which disciple of the Blood Cloak Pavilion who came here for such a serious trial would bring wine, especially drunken immortal wine that no one knows how to brew? Without drunken immortal wine, there is no way to remove the ink on the scroll painting. Without removing the ink, how can I pass this level? At this moment, Nangongzhi only felt that the banishment senior was indeed evil. Wasn't he deliberately making things difficult for others? Ha ha ha. Life's two pleasures are sword and wine. Suddenly, Nangongzhi heard a faint sound. It was like a person singing with a sword while drinking to his heart's content. Not only did it sound in his ears, but it also seemed to appear in front of Nangongzhi's eyes. Although he couldn't see the person's figure clearly, he was holding a sword in his hand. The heavenly calamity sword. This must be the banishment senior. In the image, the banishment senior was holding a brush. However, it wasn't the posture of an ordinary person writing. Instead, it was as if he was holding a sword. Drops of ink dripped from the brush. However, in mid-air, there was an invisible force that dragged the ink back to the tip of the brush. Painting? Writing? I'm not good at any of those. I only know how to wield a sword. Since I'm going to paint, I have to paint like a sword. After saying that, the banishment senior's aura, which had been slightly scattered due to drinking, was instantly restrained. His eyes, which were originally filled with a sense of sharpness, were now restrained. He looked like an ordinary person. Just like that, the banishment senior took the brush and drew on a piece of white paper in front of him. It was the ink painting that Nangongzhi was carefully looking at. Chapter 172. Puff, like a bubble bursting, everything in front of Nangongzhi seemed to turn into countless bubbles in an instant, floating away without a trace. Whether it was the sound of banishment or the figure of banishment, they all disappeared with the bubbles at this moment. Only the scroll painting in Nangongzhi's hand was left. Whether it was the rotten aura that had been corroding the scroll painting, or the sword qi injected by Nangongzhi, they all disappeared in an instant, and the blood-red lines on the ink on the scroll painting also disappeared without a trace. Only the traces of Nangongzhi's wine were still faintly visible. Am I enlightened? Nangongzhi asked himself, but found that he didn't understand. He just stared blankly at the scroll painting in his hand, not knowing what to say. In front of Nangongzhi, a dragon pattern token surrounded by some yellow aura was still floating. Nangongzhi reached out and took the token in his hand, following the brilliance of the token, he left the crypt. Perhaps only the half-corroded scroll painting placed on the stone table by Nangongzhi could prove that Nangongzhi had come here to accept this trial. He still came to the back of the golden dragon, but there was no arch in front of him. Nangongzhi was in a trance. His goal here was very simple. It was to pass these levels and then become the head of the blood cloth pavilion, adding a few chips to his survival in the ninja world. However, after passing such a few levels, Nangongzhi didn't know if he could be qualified to become the head of the blood cloth pavilion once he became the head of the blood cloth pavilion. From the beginning, from the words of the several altar lords, Nangongzhi could faintly find that although the banishment elder he respected was the head of the blood cloth pavilion, he had never intervened. Although this has something to do with the character of the banishment elder, that kind of personality is afraid of trouble, he would definitely not accept such a troublesome position. However, wasn't part of the reason also because it was too heavy to bear the burden of the lives of all the members of the organization on his shoulders? Nangongzhi thought about such a problem, his pace did not stop, and he kept walking forward along the back of the golden dragon. Not knowing how long he walked, Nangongzhi freed himself from his thoughts and found that he was already standing on the huge head of the golden dragon. Compared to the 8 dragons that turned into arches before, the golden dragon was extraordinarily large. Nangongzhi moved his body a little bit closer to the golden dragon's horn, but found that his body was not as thick as the golden dragon's horn. This golden dragon should be the last level, right? From the beginning, I have already stepped on the golden dragon level. Metal, wood, water, fire, earth, they really have a different order. But, what kind of level is this? According to the previous levels, the banishment elder should have introduced the specific content of the level to Nangongzhi, but there was nothing this time. The surroundings were extremely quiet, and even the sound of the breeze was very clear in Nangongzhi's ears. Roar! The golden dragon under Nangongzhi's feet suddenly began to sway, and a dragon's roar was heard. The sound was very loud, and it even formed a wave of air that impacted the surrounding space. Countless clouds were scattered by the dragon's roar. After the golden dragon roared, it suddenly opened its 4 claws, and clouds of mist condensed under its claws. Not long after, the golden dragon's body was covered by the mist, and the golden dragon itself began to fly. Nangongzhi quickly grabbed the golden dragon's horn that was relatively close to him, and stabilized his body. He braved the fierce wind and flew in the sky with the golden dragon. Nangongzhi no longer had the energy to calculate the passage of time, because the strong wind made Nangongzhi have to be careful not to fall off the golden dragon's head. When Nangongzhi opened his eyes that were unable to open because of the fierce wind, Nangongzhi found himself on the shore of a lake. It was not appropriate to call it the surface of a lake, because this so-called lake did not exist on the ground. The lake was suspended in the sky as if it was being dragged by white clouds. The color of the sky was reflected on the surface of the lake, and the lakeside was dyed a dazzling blue. Traces of mist condensed on the surface of the lake, and from time to time, its body twisted and swayed, giving off an ethereal feeling. If this world really had a so-called fairyland, Nangongzhi believed that this place must be a fairyland. It really suits Senior Banishment's taste. If I can stay in a place like this for a period of time without any distractions, I believe that I will definitely make progress on the path of inner strength and swordsmanship. Because this place is really suitable for calming down and improving my own shortcomings. Nangongzhi stood on the shore and looked at his reflection on the surface of the lake, and for a moment, he was filled with emotions. Trying to put his feet on the surface of the lake, Nangongzhi found that an invisible force appeared from the lake, and it formed a balance with his own strength. Sure enough, I can step on it. For some reason, when Nangongzhi saw such a flat surface of the lake, he could not help but have the thought of stepping on it. He stretched out his feet to test it, and it was really possible to step on it. Presumably, the trial for this stage is in the distant misty clouds, right? Nangongzhi looked at the clouds in the distance and began to guess. Since there were a total of 5 trials, and he was on a lake that could allow people to step on, it was not difficult to guess that his last trial would be in the depths of the clouds. Step by step, he stepped on the surface of the lake, and the wind carried a unique fishy smell to Nangong's nose. Wisps of coolness spread from Nangong's feet to his entire body. Under the influence of these two, Nangongja felt that his mind had become exceptionally calm. Even his mental strength had become exceptionally sensitive. There's more? Looks like this trial is not that simple. Nangongja knew that there was no free lunch in this trial. In the arch of the earthen dragon gate, there were no obstructions throughout the entire trial. Now that he thought about it, how unbearable would the final trial be? With the help of the lake's surface, his body and mental strength had been adjusted to their best condition. This proved that he would definitely have to risk his life in the final trial. The final trial would definitely be the most difficult one. Chapter 173. After clearing away the fog in front of him, Nangongja entered the center of the lake, which was most likely the place where the final trial would take place. A huge mysterious rune was engraved on the surface of the lake through some unknown method. Originally, the closer one was to the center of the lake, the thicker the fog was. However, the fog here seemed to have been forcibly driven away, making the surroundings exceptionally bright. Whoosh! The 4 tokens that Nangongja obtained from the previous trials suddenly flew out and landed on the blind spots of the formation one by one. The dragon aura token that was originally entwined with the light representing each of the 5 elements suddenly became particularly dazzling. These lights instantly turned into a green dragon that represented the wood element, a blue dragon that represented the water element, a red dragon that represented the fire element, and a yellow dragon that represented the earth element. After the 4 dragons were condensed, they each let out a dragon roar and flew towards Nangongja with a majestic aura. They wrapped around Nangongja's body and slowly flew towards the center of the formation with Nangongja. When Nangongja stood firmly in the center of the formation, the 4 dragons also rushed towards the center of the formation under Nangongja's feet. In an instant, the formation under Nangongja's feet became particularly dazzling. Even with Nangongja's eyesight, he was a little dazzled by the strong light at this moment. Hee. We actually face each other like this again. This really makes me feel that it's a little fun. Nangongja heard a familiar voice in his ear. This voice was really too familiar to Nangongja. Because this was his own voice. The only thing that could possibly have the same voice as him was his own inner demon that had been sealed in his spiritual space. It turned out to be like this. Nangongja seemed to have figured out something. The trial actually began the moment I stepped on the back of the golden dragon. The mysterious power that let you get out of my control came from the golden dragon, right? Nangongja looked at his inner demon and said his guess. I didn't know where the power came from at first, but until just now, when you activated this formation, a greater power than the beginning rushed into my body again. Even the spiritual power wall you left behind couldn't block this power at all. Even in the end, I could directly appear in front of you with the power of the formation. Sure enough. Even the heavens couldn't bear to see you humiliating the heavens' retribution sword, so they gave me a second chance to fight with you. The inner demon smiled and recounted what she had just experienced to her true self. As long as I can kill you, I can rely on the power of the formation to completely replace you and become the true Yama of the shinobi world. Without the home field advantage of the spiritual space, what can you use to fight me? Without hesitation, the inner demon said his purpose. Presumably, in the consciousness of the inner demon, he was suppressed by Nangongja in the spiritual space because of Nangongja's control of the spiritual space. As long as he doesn't have such a disadvantage, the two of them are almost on the same level. The inner demon is more ruthless than Nangongja. It doesn't seem impossible to defeat Nangongja and replace Nangongja. It seems that the requirement of this level is to eliminate the inner demon by myself. It's interesting, since this trial gave me such an opportunity, how can I not grasp it well? As long as I can eliminate this inner demon this time, I think I will have a huge improvement, right? Nangongja didn't care that his inner demon was still standing in front of him. He had already begun to think about the various benefits after he defeated the inner demon. When the inner demon saw Nangongja's attitude, it naturally burned with anger, even its face became ferocious. Sure enough. Although the inner demon is more insidious and ruthless, after all, the inner demon is an existence formed by some negative emotions. Compared to me, it is more irritable and extreme. When the mentality is unbalanced, it will lead to more flaws in the inner demon. The two of us are one. My inner demon is also clear in my heart. If I want to defeat the inner demon, I can only start from the loopholes in its emotions. That's right, what Nangongja said before was just a test of his own guesses. It was also the key to Nangongja's belief that he could defeat his inner demon. Although the inner demon didn't say it before, Nangongja knew that the inner demon must have received some kind of blessing from the formation, otherwise, it wouldn't be so confident to say that it will kill him and then replace him. Perhaps, the inner demon's combat power at this moment is much higher than his. The inner demon seemed to have become in a state of uncontrollable anger. It pulled out the long sword in its hand that looked exactly the same as the disaster sword and rushed towards Nangongja. At first, the inner demon's pace didn't change, it was as if it was rushing straight. However, halfway through, two figures suddenly split from the inner demon's body. It was as if the inner demon had forcibly turned into three people. As a cultivator of internal force, he can't use ninjutsu like a ninja who cultivates chakra, but he can rely on his own speed to create illusions. Even if it was practiced to a high level, it would be able to replace any illusionary body at any time to attack the enemy. Nangongja also knew this move, but it didn't seem to be as smooth as the inner demon's. Nangongja carefully looked at the three figures of the inner demon, but found that he couldn't determine which one was the true body of the inner demon. Sure enough, this formation has a special effect on the inner demon. Since he couldn't determine which one was the true body, he would just block all of them. The three figures of the inner demon had already arrived in front of Nangongja in an instant, and the three of them attacked at the same time. One used a long sword to stab Nangongja's eyebrows, one used a sword to cut Nangongja's right arm, and the last figure bent down, as if it wanted to cut Nangongja's hamstring. As long as he could see the movements of the inner demon, Nangongja was confident that he could compete with the inner demon. Nangongja raised his left foot and stepped on the sword that was about to cut his hamstring. However, he didn't feel like he stepped on it at all. Obviously, it was just an illusion. With a wave of his right hand, the disaster sword's edge cut the throat of the inner demon that wanted to cut off his right arm, but it still felt like an illusion. It's you. Nangongja pushed out his left hand with internal force, and directly slapped the abdomen of the inner demon that wanted to stab the sword between his eyebrows. Chapter 174. Nangongja felt the illusory sensation again. He knew that the inner demon who was holding a long sword and was about to stab him between his eyebrows was also an illusion. A gust of wind came from behind his head. Was this the killing move of the inner demon? Nangongja quickly swept the long sword in his hand behind him. The sound of metal clashing could be heard. It was a close call. Nangongja blocked the true killing move of the inner demon. I thought that splitting into two phantoms was your limit, but I didn't expect you to be able to split into three phantoms so vividly. Nangongja exerted force on his feet to create distance between himself and the inner demon. However, the inner demon was extremely fast. It was almost sticking to Nangongja's retreating figure. The distance between the two did not increase at all. Instead, it got closer. Hee. There are many things that you don't know, the inner demon looked at Nangongja's face and said with a strange smile. Indeed, this array formation has given you quite a bit of power. These footwork techniques that create illusions are still in their embryonic form in my mind, but you are already proficient in using them? Nangongja looked at the inner demon and said calmly. But, relying on the formation's support for you. Is it really fun to use such a method to defeat me? Nangongzhi was not so much a ninja as he was a more traditional cultivator. Every time he fought with others, Nangongzhi hoped to use his own skills to fight. Nangongzhi did not reject the idea. After all, Nangongzhi often wore Li Yang's black armor to fight. However, as long as it was a problem that could be solved with his own strength, Nangongzhi rarely summoned Li Yang. As expected of my original body. You're so stubborn. The inner demon looked at Nangongzhi and said sarcastically. I don't care if you're stubborn or pretentious. Only the power that was truly cultivated by oneself was the most suitable power for oneself. This is my own request, it has nothing to do with anyone else. Nangongzhi did not lose his composure because of the inner demon's mockery. He continued to speak calmly. Then you can hold on to your pitiful pride and let me kill you and replace you. My true body. The demon slowly sank to the bottom of the lake and disappeared from Nangongzhi's sight. Only this sentence was left, still echoing in the surrounding space. Nangongzhi knew that the inner demon was only temporarily gone. Now, the inner demon was like a venomous snake staring at its prey. As long as there was a chance, the inner demon would never be soft-hearted and bite him viciously. Nangongzhi held the Heaven's Calamity sword in his hand and slightly arched his back. His mind was completely focused. Swish, Nangongzhi suddenly jumped up, and a sword chi shot out from the water where Nangongzhi was just standing. Before Nangongzhi fell from the sky, several more sword chi shot out. Each sword chi was aimed at the vital parts of Nangongzhi's body. Nangongzhi, who was in the air, had lost his footing. If this continued, his body would soon be pierced by the sword chi. You're not the only one who knows how to control sword chi. Nangongzhi shook the Heaven's Calamity sword in his hand. A sword chi shot out from the Heaven's Calamity sword and directly slashed under Nangongzhi's feet. Nangongzhi saw the opportunity and stepped on the sword chi. He suddenly used his agile body technique and his body jumped up like a bird. Nangongzhi moved to the side and dodged several sword chis. The remaining sword chis were also destroyed by Nangongzhi's Heavenly Calamity sword. Come out! Nangongzhi shouted. More and more sword chi was born from the Heaven's Calamity sword. In an instant, dozens of sword chi had already wrapped around Nangongzhi's body. Nangongzhi held the Heaven Calamity sword and pointed it downwards. Suddenly, Nangongzhi fell towards the surface of the lake like a 1,000-pound weight. Bang! The huge force directly shook the lake water into mist, and at the same time, it also made a huge sound. The moment the tip of the sword touched the lake, the sword chi wrapped around Nangongzhi's body flew in the direction of the Heaven's Calamity sword. Like sharks hunting for their prey, Nangongzhi's sword chi wandered around the lake, killing everything in its path. Nangongzhi obviously wanted to use this method to force his inner demon out of the lake so that it would be easier for him to fight it. The sword chi's effect was very obvious. The inner demon's body that was hidden in the lake was forcibly forced out. There was even a small tear at the corner of the inner demon's clothes. It must have been caused by the sword chi that was injected into the lake. The inner demon did not speak. He just held the long sword in his hand and rushed towards Nangongzhi. This time, there were no afterimages because the inner demon knew that this was a trick that could only be used once. His original body must be on guard against his doppelgangers. Since that was the case, he might as well fight directly. The long sword in the inner demon's hand trembled slightly. There were even some phantoms on the body of the sword. Using this method of vibration to increase the speed and strength of the long sword in his hand was really a good trick. Nangongzhi sighed slightly in his heart. However, he did not directly apply it to his swordsmanship. Although this method was simple, it required a lot of practice to integrate this trick into his swordsmanship. Otherwise, he would be a complete troublemaker. The power of his swordsmanship might be reduced because he was not familiar with the technique. Just as he was about to get close to Nangongzhi, the inner demon's arms suddenly moved. The high speed made the inner demon look like he had 2 more arms. This was not a trick like the previous illusion. As long as the inner demon was willing, each of the illusionary long swords would be a full blow. Nangongzhi was very familiar with this swordsmanship. It was the fatal 13 swords that his sister, Nangong-ro, had taught him a long time ago. The fatal 13 swords was a swordsmanship that did not care about the form. Every move was a fight to the death. Every move was filled with murderous intent. The inner demon's temperament was different from his. When he used the fatal 13 swords, he was filled with murderous intent. Nangongzhi also raised the Heaven's Disaster Sword in his hand and fought against the inner demon's moves. Even if he did not have the same power as the inner demon when he used the fatal 13 swords, Nangongzhi was someone who had completely mastered the fatal 13 swords. Nangongzhi still had a certain degree of confidence in the most basic way of countering each move. Chapter 175. Qi, a trail of blood quietly appeared on Nangongzhi's face. Nangongzhi was still sweating because of the frightening moment just now. Originally, with Nangongzhi's understanding of the fatal 13 swords, although there was a certain gap in strength and speed between him and the inner demon, who had been strengthened by the formation, he could still rely on his skills to deal with the inner demon. However, just now, the inner demon used a move that Nangongzhi had never seen before. It was a move that was derived from the fatal 13 swords. This move was almost a perfect display of the ruthlessness of the fatal 13 swords. At that moment, the inner demon's murderous aura was so frightening that it almost froze Nangongzhi's movements. Watching the blade getting closer and closer to his face, Nangongzhi used all the strength in his body to move again. However, his face was still scratched by the blade, leaving a bloody scar. This move, Nangongzhi looked at the inner demon and said with lingering fear, "Don't you remember? When you obtained the fatal 13 swords and practiced it to the extreme, you had a wisp of inspiration." With the inner demon's reminder, Nangongzhi finally remembered that when he practiced the fatal 13 swords, he vaguely felt that the fatal 13 swords should not stop at the 13th move. However, he had been trying to deduce it but to no avail. Therefore, he did not continue to deduce it. "This is the 14th sword?" Nangongzhi looked at the inner demon and said the answer. Compared to the 14th sword, which was almost like a demonic sword, the first 13 swords of the fatal 13 swords were like green leaves against a red flower. Endless ruthlessness and murderous aura, the essence of the first 13 swords were gathered in this sword. It was the 14th sword that could be called the Ghost God's sword. "You can actually perform such a sword?" Nangongzhi was very surprised because this sword only existed in Nangongzhi's consciousness. Compared to the body technique that the inner demon had used to create illusions, this sword technique that was close to the supernatural made Nangongzhi's mind more easily shaken. "That's right. What you can do, what you can't do, I can easily do. What can you use to win against me? Why don't you just obediently stretch out your neck and let me inherit everything you have? With my strength, wouldn't protecting those girls be a piece of cake?" The inner demon looked at Nangongzhi with disdain and disdain. He, who was able to display a sword move that was close to that of a supernatural being, was indeed qualified to look at Nangongzhi with disdain. Nangongzhi did not speak. He only held the Heaven's Disaster Sword tighter in his hand. His slightly trembling hands held the Heaven's Disaster Sword in front of him. Although he did not speak, it was obvious that Nangongzhi was unwilling to give up everything he had. He. Stubborn. But that's good. This way, I can fight to my heart's content and vent the resentment that you have suppressed me for all these years. The inner demon still had a strange smile on his face as he attacked Nangongzhi with his sword. Although it was still the fatal 13 swords, it seemed that the ruthlessness of the fatal 13 swords had increased because of the 14th sword move. On the other hand, Nangongzhi had already lost in terms of confidence because of the 14th sword just now. Although Nangongzhi was still trying his best to parry every sword attack from the inner demon, he was getting more and more powerless. Nangongzhi blocked the inner demon's sword with the Heaven's Disaster Sword. However, his hand that was holding the sword also fell to the side of his body because of the huge force. The web between his thumb and forefinger was even slightly cracked because of the strength of the inner demon's sword. Traces of blood seeped into the sword hilt. Some sticky blood stained the sword hilt, making Nangongzhi feel that the Heaven's Disaster Sword was very heavy at this moment. The Heaven's Disaster Sword even looked like it was about to fall out of his hand. Look at your current sorry state. You can't even hold the sword properly and you still want to fight with me? Don't joke around. The inner demon sneered at Nangongzhi. With your current state, what right do you have to fight with others? What right do you have to swear that you can protect everything you want to protect? Instead of letting you go out and make a fool of yourself, you don't even know when you will silently die in the hands of others. Why don't you just let me end you? What's the point of saying so many useless things? If you want to fight, then let's fight. At the beginning of the battle, Nangongzhi wanted to use sarcasm to disturb the inner demon's state of mind. However, at this moment, every word of the inner demon was like a sharp thorn that attacked Nangongzhi. Nangongzhi couldn't help but have a trace of doubt in his heart. Could he really accomplish all the things that he had hoped for with the current him? In order to adjust his state of mind, Nangongzhi could only shout loudly, trying to expel every word of the inner demon from his mind. The inner demon's mouth curved into a smile. It seemed that it was very satisfied with Nangongzhi's current state. It turned its body and stabbed its long sword at a strange angle. This time, Nangongzhi didn't block the inner demon's sword like before. Instead, a trace of his Shikigami appeared. The inner demon's long sword directly slashed past Nangongzhi's neck. A strand of black hair fell to the ground beside Nangongzhi. The inner demon could have directly taken Nangongzhi's life with this sword. However, when the long sword was about to slash Nangongzhi's throat, the inner demon quietly moved the long sword to the side and only took away a strand of Nangongzhi's hair. The smile on its face was like a cat that was teasing a mouse. It was so calm and so cruel. Isn't this interesting? The inner demon seemed to treat teasing Nangongzhi as a way to relieve its boredom. Its eyes were filled with satisfaction. Nangongzhi drew his sword. He poured his chaotic thoughts into the sword and stabbed the inner demon with a fierceness that was different from before. Didn't you look down on my fighting style? But now, every move of yours is very similar to my swordsmanship. Which one of us is more like a clown who wants to make others laugh? The inner demon looked at Nangongzhi's sword. It just casually waved the long sword in its hand and broke Nangongzhi's swordsmanship. It even took a step forward and kicked Nangongzhi. Nangongzhi directly fell onto the surface of the lake, looking indescribably embarrassed. Deity. Nangongzhi. Woodleaf Yama. Have you seen a dog? Look at you now. Aren't you a mad dog that has lost its mind due to anger? A mad dog like you should use blood and pain to teach you who is the master of life and death. The inner demon walked to Nangongzhi's side and stepped directly on Nangongzhi's back. Nangongzhi, who was struggling to stand up and continue fighting, was mercilessly stepped on to the surface of the lake. Nangongzhi's face was reflected on the surface of the lake, which made Nangongzhi extremely frustrated. Chapter 176. To be honest, I'm a little tired of looking at your face. Forget it, I'll just get rid of you as soon as possible. The inner demon originally wanted to play with his main body, but when he looked at his main body's face, he couldn't help but feel irritated. Therefore, the inner demon placed the long sword in his hand beside Nangongzhi's neck. With a light slash, his main body's life would end at this moment, and a brand new Nangongzhi who could truly bear the title of Yama would be born. To be honest, the inner demon felt that this was the best way to go. However, since when was Nangongzhi someone who would stretch out his neck to be slaughtered? Thinking back to the water dragon arch illusion, Nangongzhi knew that he couldn't give up so easily when his inner demon faced Nangong-ro, Mashiro, and Little Linger. There were still many people waiting for him to protect and guard, right? Nangongzhi shifted his gaze away from his face reflected on the surface of the lake, and stared at the long sword in the inner demon's hand. He suddenly exerted force on his body, and forcibly pushed away the inner demon's foot that was on his back. Using the calamity sword in his hand to meet the inner demon's long sword, Nangongzhi's strength was inferior to the inner demon's. Under the influence of the inner demon's long sword, Nangongzhi's body slid fiercely in the opposite direction, sticking close to the surface of the lake. When the inner demon saw his main body's actions, his face turned extremely ugly. "Tsk. I say, you clearly can't beat me at all. Can't you just die properly? Why do you have to force yourself to fight me? You're really troublesome." The inner demon clicked his tongue impatiently and looked at Nangongzhi with great impatience. "How can I give up so easily?" Nangongzhi wasn't in a good spot either. Just now, in order to borrow the strength of the Heart Devil sword to escape the attack range of the Heart Devil, he didn't use too much strength. Even his internal organs had suffered some injuries due to the forceful impact. Blood was flowing out of Nangongzhi's nostrils. "Then, I will finish you with one move." The inner demon watched Nangongzhi as if he was watching a disgusting cockroach as he slowly raised his sword. The hand holding the sword moved closer to his ear, while the other hand gently stroked the sword's spine. The sound of fingernails rubbing against the blade was very clear. As the sound of friction gradually spread, the inner demon fell into a strange state. His pair of eyes, which originally had some black luster, were instantly covered by black. Even when he breathed in and out, a faint black mist would escape from his eyes. The murderous aura was released from his body without any concealment. A large part of it flowed into the long sword in the inner demon's hand, while the rest rushed towards Nangongzhi. The situation was extremely similar to when Nangongzhi was injured. The moment the murderous aura approached Nangongzhi's body, it changed from an invisible state. Like concrete cooling, the murderous aura enveloped Nangongzhi, restricting his movements. Nangongzhi couldn't even move. Only one of his eyes could slowly turn and see what was happening around him. This was the essence of the fatal 13 swords, the fatal 14th sword that was like a red flower. "Kill," the inner demon suddenly spat out such a word. His voice was hoarse and choppy, like a person who hadn't spoken for many years suddenly opening his mouth. However, as soon as the inner demon said the word "kill," the black that lingered in his eyes quickly faded away. His eyes had completely turned white, and there were even some ferocious blood streaks on them. No matter who it was, being stared at by such an eye would cause fear to emerge in their hearts, let alone Nangongzhi who was facing the inner demon. A chill, a bone-chilling chill emerged from Nangongzhi's heart. It turned out that the sudden attack from the inner demon wasn't the fatal 14th sword at all. Now, the inner demon had completely condensed his murderous aura, his resentment, and his crazy desire to kill into his sword. Using the murderous aura to solidify the opponent's movements, using the demonic eye to stimulate the opponent's mind, and finally using the long sword in his hand to give the opponent a fatal blow? Converge, condense, solidify, a sword that was like a ghost, a sword that belonged to a ghost. Was this the fatal 14th sword that belonged to the inner demon? Previously, Nangongzhi had used all his strength to break free from the weakened version of the fatal 14th sword, barely saving his life. Then, how could Nangongzhi resist the complete version of the fatal 14th sword? The sword edge with murderous aura and cold air was getting closer and closer to Nangongzhi. The tip of Nangongzhi's nose seemed to have a thin layer of frost because of the cold air on the sword edge. Was he really going to die in the hands of his inner demon? Nangongzhi looked at the inner demon and looked at the long sword in his hand. At this moment, he suddenly felt that time had slowed down. He could only stand there motionlessly and watch as the inner demon stabbed the sword in his hand towards his vital parts and took his life away. Wait. Time really seemed to have slowed down. Nangongzhi was trapped in the murderous aura, but his heartbeat and breathing reminded him that time really seemed to have slowed down. The Heaven's Calamity sword in his hand became slightly hot, making Nangongzhi's palm feel like it was being burned. Why? This was too strange. The flow of time actually slowed down. Nangongzhi's eyes suddenly became blurry. The inner demon was no longer there, and the ghost-like sword of the inner demon was no longer there. The lake, the thick fog, and the array had all disappeared without a trace in an instant. There was only one person standing in front of him, holding a brush with ink. He held the brush in his hand as if he was holding a long sword. With a light stroke, he left an ink mark on the paper in front of him. That person's face was the banishment senior that Nangongzhi was very familiar with. The state of banishment and the state of banishment when he waved the brush in his hand was very similar to the state of the inner demon when he used the 14th sword. However, Nangongzhi carefully observed and found that this was not the case. The 14th sword that the inner demon used was to pour everything into the sword in his hand, whether it was murderous aura or resentment. He let the sword become his own and let the sword become the dominant existence. There seemed to be no such thing as the inner demon in the world. There was only the sword and the target that the sword wanted to kill. Chapter 177. However, banishment and the inner demon were completely different. Senior banishment did not turn himself into a sword. Instead, he used his soul to wrap around the brush in his hand that he had used as a sword. He used his mind to carefully feel everything about the brush. Regardless of whether it was the scratches on the brush or the state of each hair on the brush, they were all deeply imprinted in his mind by banishment. Then, the brush actually formed a strange resonance with banishment's breathing and the inner energy in banishment's body. That's right. The inner demon turned himself into the sword in his hand, but senior banishment turned the sword into himself. Using the sword to control the person and using the person to control the sword, the difference was very obvious. Nangongzhi finally understood what the scroll painting in the Arch of the Earth Dragon Gate wanted him to comprehend. It was this kind of sword that turned the sword into his own sword. The seal of killing intent seemed to no longer exist, and Nangongzhi's body could actually move. Nangongzhi's right hand slowly rose, and Nangongzhi's left hand grasped the hilt of the sword. This was the most basic move when one first started cultivating the sword, the most fundamental slash. Nangongzhi closed his eyes. There was no lake under his feet, no clouds around him, no fatal sword from the inner demon, no breath, and no heartbeat. There was only one Nangongzhi, and only one Heaven's Calamity sword. Nangongzhi felt the Heaven's Calamity sword, and the Heaven's Calamity sword felt Nangongzhi. Whether it was the feeling of helplessness or the fear of facing the inner demon slash, it seemed to have been instantly destroyed by the Heaven's Calamity sword. The Heaven's Calamity sword was very happy. It was happy that its master had finally calmed down and no longer had so many distracting thoughts. It only held itself and simply wanted to slash. Nangongzhi was so happy that he could actually feel the emotions of the Heavenly Calamity sword. It was not dissatisfied with him not being able to drink blood to its heart's content, nor was it afraid of the inner demons. The Heavenly Calamity sword only wanted to slash down to its heart's content. His mouth opened slightly, but his weak voice resounded through the clouds like the morning bell and the evening drum. It also echoed in Nangongzhi's heart. The vital energy of heaven and earth, vast and everlasting, Nangongzhi's heart and Nangongzhi's tribulation sword merged into one. Nangongzhi's inner energy and Nangongzhi's sword chi. At this moment, Nangongzhi's spiritual power and everything about Nangongzhi was surging into the heavenly tribulation sword without any restraint. I'm not asking for immortal slaying. Nangongzhi's voice was no longer faintly discernible. Instead, it was extremely clear. But I beg, to slay demons and gods. Sword of ghosts and gods. Inner demons? Nangongzhi did not care. If it was demons and gods, then he would use this sword to slay demons and gods. If it was an inner demon, then he would use this sword to destroy it. What is this? What is this? Impossible, impossible, this is clearly my victory. I can clearly replace you and become a new life. What right do you have to use this sword to extinguish all my hopes? From the moment Nangongzhi's body could move, when Nangongzhi placed the heavenly calamity sword in his hand in front of his chest, the inner demon had already sensed it. However, this world-destroying 14th sword had already been slashed out. Everything was controlled by the sword in the inner demon's hand. The inner demon could not stop his sword, nor was he willing to stop his sword. Endless hatred and killing intent surged out from the inner demon's body. Even the inner demon's body had become somewhat illusory. The inner demon burned his own foundation, producing even more killing intent and resentment to nurture the sword in his hand. He only wanted to make this sword stronger, strong enough to kill his own body. However, Nangongzhi did not hear the inner demon's words at all. Nangongzhi had long ago comprehended the Sacrifice Heart Sutra, which was to sacrifice the sword and have no other thoughts. When he comprehended the move, slay demons and gods, Nangongzhi had already pushed his Sacrifice Heart Sutra to an even more profound level. At this moment, Nangongzhi only wanted to slash out with the sword in his hand. The heavenly calamity sword's edge already had a faint pure white light. Although it was very small, it was impossible for people to ignore its existence. The heavenly calamity sword and the sword in the inner demon's hand clashed together. There was no shockwave, nor was there any earth-shattering sound. It was just like the two most ordinary swords clashing together without a trace of smoke or fire. Ding! A crisp sound rang out, and Nangongzhi and the inner demon exchanged positions. The two of them stood back to back, and their hands were still in the same posture as before. However, the sword in the inner demon's hand made such a crisp sound, and cracks like a spider web appeared on the sword. No, it was not just on the sword. These cracks actually spread to the inner demon's body, and traces of white light were emitted from the cracks. The inner demon seemed to want to open his mouth to say something, but he could not even move. In an instant it was like a porcelain with cracks all over it, turning into fragments that fell onto the lake surface. The lake surface did not hold up these fragments like how it held up Nangongzhi's body. Instead, it allowed these fragments to sink into the lake. There were only a few slight ripples, which proved that someone had fought with Nangongzhi here. Nangongzhi also slowly put away the Heaven's Calamity sword in his hand, and sheathed it back into the scabbard. His face was pale and fatigued. It was clear that this demon-slaying technique was not easy to execute. To be honest, whether it is the fatal 14th sword or the Heaven's Calamity sword, they are all sword moves of the same level. It is impossible to judge which one is better, using a human to control a sword or using a sword to control a human. The only reason you lost was because your sword wasn't cultivated by yourself. Even if the formation provided you with a sword move that suits you, it is not a sword that belongs to you. Nangongzhi seemed to be talking to the inner demon, but it also seemed like he was talking to himself. There was no dragon pattern token falling from the sky, and only a door appeared in front of Nangongzhi. It did not have the grandeur and domineering aura of the giant dragon arch. It was just a simple wooden door without any decorations. Nangongzhi reached out and grabbed a handle on the wooden door. Kacha, the sound of wood rubbing against each other sounded, and a white light was emitted from the wooden door. Ninja World. Blood Robe Pavilion. I am back, I, Nangongzhi, am back. Are you ready? Nangongzhi said silently in his heart, and firmly stepped forward. Chapter 178. After Nangongzhi entered the path of dragonization, the 5 altar lords did not leave the headquarters of the Blood Cloth Pavilion. Regardless of whether Nangongzhi could pass the path of dragonization or not, the 5 altar lords had the responsibility and obligation to wait for Nangongzhi to finish the trial. If Nangongzhi passed, then Nangongzhi would already be the head of the blood cloth pavilion. It was only right for the 5 altar lords to meet the head of the blood cloth pavilion. If Nangongzhi did not pass, Nangongzhi was also a top expert in the ninja world. The 5 altar lords would not mind forming a good relationship with Nangongzhi, right? At this moment, the 9 dragons painted wall suddenly bloomed with a different kind of brilliance. The brilliance instantly condensed into a huge beam of light. Even the roof above the 9 dragons painted wall was directly hit by the beam of light. The beam of light went straight into the sky and did not dissipate for a long time. Not only the 5 altar lords, even the most ordinary members of the blood cloth pavilion had already seen this brilliant beam of light. Calm down the ordinary disciples, I will go find the remaining altar lords and see what happened to the 9 dragons painted wall. Every time the 9 dragons painted wall was opened before, there was no such scene. After all, this was the territory of the Greenwood altar. Most of the remaining 4 altar lord subordinates were still outside the headquarters of the blood cloth pavilion. Therefore, Old Man Aoki directly gave the order to calm down the basic disciples. Without waiting for the people of the Greenwood altar next to him to answer, Old Man Aoki had already directly left his room at an extremely fast speed. Only the door was left open and the disciples of the Greenwood altar stood there in a daze. Was this still the mature and steady altar lord of the Greenwood altar that he knew? Old Man Aoki ran in the direction of the 9 dragons painted wall as fast as he could. The other altar lords were not stupid. Seeing the abnormality of the 9 dragons painted wall, they must have also moved in the direction of the beam of light. Instead of going to the residences of the altar lords and finding nothing, it was better to rush in the direction of the 9 dragons painted wall first. On the way, they would definitely meet the other altar lords. Greenwood hadn't walked far when a green figure appeared beside Old Man Greenwood. Altar leader Qingmu, this light pillar from the 9 dragons painted wall is really unusual. Could it be, when Bai Shui saw Qingmu, he didn't stop, but he still told him his guess. Although he didn't say it clearly, Old Man Qingmu knew that Bai Shui felt that this matter definitely had something to do with Nangongzhi, who was undergoing the trial on the road of dragon transformation. It's still too early to talk about this. Let's go to the 9 dragons painted wall first. Let's talk about this when we meet up with the other altar masters. Old Man Qingmu shook his head and didn't let Bai Shui continue. Now that everything was still uncertain, it was best not to make any rash comments. When Greenwood and Bai Shui arrived in front of the 9 dragon painted wall, the other altar lords Rui Jin, Qi Yan, and Ho Tu were already standing in front of the 9 dragon painted wall. Greenwood. Bai Shui. You're here. Rui Jin and Qi Yan were currently staring at the 9 dragon painted wall. They didn't talk to Greenwood and Bai Shui who had just arrived. On the contrary, Ho Tu didn't seem to care about the result of the road of dragon transformation. After seeing Greenwood and Bai Shui, he greeted them in a very good-natured manner. What's the situation now? Greenwood asked Ho Tuesday. The door to the road of dragon transformation on the 9 dragons painted wall has already appeared, but we still haven't seen little friend Nangongzhi come out. Whether he succeeds or fails, we'll know the result very soon. Ho Tu rubbed his head and didn't explain the situation in detail. After all, no one had encountered such a reaction from the 9 dragon painted wall before. In the past, the 9 dragons painted wall would directly open the door when it opened. Then, all the people who failed the trial would be forcefully thrown out by a huge force. Now that the huge light pillar had appeared, they felt that they didn't know where to start. Just as the altar lords were discussing the abnormality of the 9 dragon painted wall, a foot stretched out from the door of the 9 dragon painted wall's path of dragon transformation. When the owner of the foot completely walked out of the door of the 9 dragons painted wall, the altar lord saw the face of the owner of the foot clearly. It was Nangongzhi. Oh. You're all still waiting for me here? Nangongja had just come out and saw the altar lord standing in front of the 9 dragons painted wall. He was slightly surprised and said. Greenwood pointed to the sky, and Nangongja followed Greenwood's finger and saw the light pillar that shot up into the sky from the 9 dragons painted wall. So it's like this? Nangongja suddenly smiled a bit awkwardly. Such an entrance was too flashy. No, this doesn't match my low-key purpose. Little friend, I wonder if you, just as Greenwood opened his mouth and wanted to ask Nangongja about the result of the 9 dragons painted wall, a blood-red stream of light suddenly flew over from afar and covered Nangongja's body. Taking a closer look, it was the blood-stained brocade robe that was enshrined in the hall by the people of the blood-clothed pavilion. It seems that the result is already very clear. Nangongja smiled at Old Man Greenwood and reached out his hand to touch the blood-stained robe on his body. Greetings, Chief. Greetings, Chief. Greetings, Chief. The altar lords immediately half-knelt on the ground and saluted Nangongja. Nangongja looked at the altar lords half-kneeling in front of him, but he didn't feel the slightest bit of joy of leading a large organization. Instead, he was filled with worry. He had passed such a trial, brought the heavenly calamity sword, and took away the authority of these altar masters. He had even directly sat on their heads. No one would be willing to have someone sitting on their head so easily, let alone the 5 powerful and authoritative internal strength cultivators of the blood-clothed pavilion. He didn't know how much trouble he would have to face in the future. However, at this moment, Nangongja couldn't reveal his thoughts. He could only hurriedly hold the arms of Old Man Greenwood and Altar Lord Ho-Tu, who were closest to him, and said to the 5 altar lords at the same time, "There's no need to be so polite. I'm also new here, so there are many things that I'm not familiar with and understand. In the future, I hope that we can work together to make the blood-clothed pavilion stronger. Everyone, please get up." After Nangongja finished speaking, he took the lead to help Greenwood and Ho-Tu up. Then, he went to the other 3 altar lords and helped them up one by one. We're all people who have passed the dragonization path, so we know best how difficult it is. Since you can pass the dragonization path, you naturally have a mind and strength that surpasses ours. Therefore, we must support you with all our strength and make the blood-clothed pavilion stronger. Ruijin went to Nangongja's side and told him the same thing. The other altar lords also nodded one by one. If outsiders saw the state of the 5 altar lords and Nangongja at this moment, they would definitely give a thumbs up and praise them for being very harmonious. Chapter 179. Chief, although you have passed the path of dragonization and obtained the recognition of the blood cloak of banishment Senpai. But we still need a ceremony to tell all the blood cloak pavilion disciples that we have a chief, so. Aoki stepped forward and said to Nangongja. Aoki-sama, you don't have to worry about it. Since I have become the chief of the blood cloak pavilion, I naturally have to let all the blood cloak pavilion disciples know about my existence. Otherwise, wouldn't it be a joke if the general doesn't know his soldiers? I don't know if you have already made any arrangements. Nangongja smiled and said to the altar lords. Although our blood cloak pavilion is not a particularly large organization, we still have many disciples. Most of the disciples under my command are responsible for logistics, and many of them have been scattered all over the ninja world to run some business. Sharp Metal Altar and Scarlet Flame Altar led by Sharp Metal Altar and Scarlet Flame Altar are responsible for all kinds of military missions, and almost none of them are left. In order to cooperate with the various actions of Sharp Metal Altar and Scarlet Flame Altar, a large number of disciples of Deep Earth Altar also follow them to perform missions. The disciples of Clear Water Altar are mainly responsible for hiding, spying, and sometimes carrying out some assassination missions. Therefore, it is not realistic to have all the disciples gather at the headquarters. Aoki's face was a little embarrassed. In fact, Nangongja's meaning was very obvious. He hoped that he could meet all the members of the Blood Cloak Pavilion. But now, he had to directly reject the proposal of his new boss, which really made Aoki feel uncomfortable all over. But as the oldest and most experienced of the 5 Altar Lords, Aoki couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. Aoki had to tell Nangongja that he could only accept the situation of, the general doesn't know his soldiers, and the soldiers don't know his generals. Nangongja didn't show any displeasure on his face, instead, he had a gentle smile. When Aoki spoke, Nangongja nodded from time to time, as if he felt that there was no problem with Aoki's statement. I was too rash. If you want to maintain the stability and development of an organization, then the members of an organization must not stay at the headquarters without doing anything. Since we can't get all the disciples of the Blood Garment Pavilion here, how are we going to carry out the succession ceremony? The few of us have discussed it. If you can accept it, we will gather all the middle-level and high-level cadres who are free. We will let you meet them and conduct the succession ceremony together. In this way, not only would the situation of, the general doesn't know his soldiers, and the soldiers don't know his general, be avoided, it would also save the disciples from the tiring journey. I wonder if you think this is a good idea? Aoki suggested to Nangongja, and the other altar lords nodded in agreement. Obviously, they did not have any objections. Perhaps these people had already discussed this solution when Nangongja entered the path of dragon transformation? Your Excellency, Aoki's suggestion is somewhat feasible. I wonder how long it will take for all the middle-level and high-level members to gather. Nangongja didn't argue with Aoki about the details of the succession ceremony. After all, the altar lords must have discussed it with each other. Currently, Nangongja was not very clear about the various information about the Blood Garment Pavilion, so he would definitely face such a situation now. This was normal. Nangongja also knew that he would inevitably face such a deadlock. This was also something that he had to go through to truly take charge of the Blood Garment Pavilion. If he could solve this problem well, then Nangongja would be the official Blood Garment Pavilion's chief. If he couldn't solve this problem, then he would just be a mascot. In that case, he would just take on the title of first seat and become a good mascot. If there was any battle that required Nangongja's assistance, he would have to fight to the death for the Blood Clothing Pavilion. Because all the cadres are scattered all over the place, it will take some time to gather them. If everything goes well, I think they will all be gathered in about a month. During this time, we can also prepare for the succession ceremony. If you don't mind, you can take a look at our Blood Garment Pavilion's records and ancient books during this time. You can learn about the Blood Garment Pavilion. Bai Shui was in charge of intelligence work. This kind of information was given to Nangongja by Bai Shui. There's nothing wrong with that. It's only a month. I still have the patience to read some of the Blood Garment Pavilion's records and ancient books. Of course, it's natural. What's there to mind? Nangongja nodded. He felt that what Bai Shui said was very reasonable and there was nothing to doubt. Then, Chief, we will take our leave first to make arrangements. Next, let Bai Shui take the altar lord to the chief's room and bring the records and ancient books. Is that okay? Aoki, Qi Yen, Rui Jin, and Ho Tu all bowed one by one, indicating that they wanted to leave first to deal with various matters. Of course, of course. You all go. Bai Shui and I will go to the chief's room. Nangongja waved his hand, indicating that the 4 altar lords could leave for the time being. He followed Bai Shui's guidance to a room on the top floor of the Blood Garment Pavilion. This room had a somewhat rustic appearance. There were no decorative ornaments. There were only a few bookshelves, an office desk, and a few chairs. Although this place looked very clean, it was obvious that people often came here to tidy it up. However, it appeared very cold and cheerless. There was no sign of life. This is the chief's room. It's mainly used for office work. The living quarters are elsewhere. Later, if you need to rest, just call for the servants at the door. They will naturally take you to a place to rest. As Bai Shui spoke, he walked to the side of a bookshelf in the room. He opened the empty bookshelf and pressed a button at a corner of the bookshelf. The bookshelf shrank inwards towards the wall, and in its place was a somewhat small dark room. In addition to a few oil lamps providing illumination in the dark room, there were several rows of bookshelves. There were many books and scrolls on them. Some of the books and scrolls had a lot of dust on them. It was obvious that they had been there for a long time. These are some of the ancient books and records of our Blood Garment Pavilion's various activities. Apart from me, the altar lord, and you, the chief, no one else can enter here. Bai Shui picked from the bookshelf and took out a book that wasn't too thin and held it in his hand. He then walked to Nangong's side and placed a few books in Nangong's hands. These are some of the basic information of our Blood Garment Pavilion. You can take a look at them. Bai Shui's face carried a slight smile, but Nangong's expression became somewhat strange. However, he quickly restrained himself. Chapter 180. Looking at Bai Shui's departing figure, Nangong's left hand tightened as if he was holding on to something. Nangong's scanned the room with his immense mental power in an instant. After making sure that there was nothing to monitor him, Nangong's took a few steps forward and closed the door. Sitting on the chair behind the desk, Nangong's casually placed the blood-red robe that belonged to the banishment elder to the side. He then took out the thing in his left hand. It was a scroll that looked a little old. The words, "Action Record," were directly written on the scroll. "This Bai Shui, what is the meaning of secretly stuffing this scroll into my hands? Is there something else that can't be exposed?" Nangong's was a little puzzled because he basically didn't have any contact with a hidden force like the Blood-Red Robe Pavilion. What did their actions have to do with him? Not to mention, this seemed to be an action record from a long time ago. For some unknown reason, Nangong's heart began to feel a little irritable. Nangong's held the scroll in his hand and didn't open it for a long time. Why is this? Why is my heart so unsettled? Nangong's didn't know what was wrong with him. Even the scroll in his hand was stuffed into Nangong's chest and he didn't look at it again. Should I go to the Lion Clan's alternate space to see my sister, Mashiro, and little Linger? During the trial, what the inner demon did to the three girls in the illusion made Nangong's want to see them very much. Nangong's walked to a slightly wider area in the office and inserted the Heaven's Disaster Sword into the ground. A formation instantly spread out and burst out with a faint but very conspicuous brilliance. With a flash of brilliance, Nangong's figure disappeared from the office of the Blood Cloak Pavilion. Several altar masters simultaneously felt the spatial fluctuations coming from Nangong's office, but none of them cared. They just continued with their work. However, the brilliance in their eyes proved that they were not as calm as they appeared to be. With a flash of light, Nangong's figure appeared in front of the small house built from pure white in the Lion Clan's alternate space. She gently pushed open the door and saw Mashiro sitting in the courtyard, sewing something with a needle and thread in his hands. Nangong's had already walked to Mashiro's side. Mashiro did not even realize that there was an additional person behind him. Perhaps it was because Mashiro felt particularly safe in the Lion Clan's alternate dimension? Sigh. Mashiro let out a long sigh and put the needle and thread and cloth in his hands on the table in front of him. He looked at his masterpiece with some relief. I don't know if Miyagi will like this kind of clothes. The clothes that Mashiro sewed were actually for Nangong's. I like it very much, ah. So Miyagi likes it very much. The two of them awkwardly chatted for a while. Wait. Mashiro suddenly felt that something was wrong. Didn't Miyagi leave the alternate dimension to deal with some things in the shinobi world? How could she answer his question? Really? Why do I have such a problem with auditory hallucinations? Mashiro turned around and seemed to be going into the house to pour himself a glass of water. However, he directly bumped into Nangong's arms. Miyagi? You're back? Mashiro realized that Nangongja was back, but his eyes didn't dare to look at Nangongja. He struggled twice with his hands and broke free from Nangongja's arms. Sure enough. Mashiro is still blaming me? Although a large part of the reason why Mashiro broke free from his arms was because of her shyness, but the way she didn't dare to look at Nangongja and the panicked tone made Nangongja feel that Mashiro still hasn't gotten over betraying him. But this kind of thing can't be solved with a few words. In the end, Mashiro needs to walk out of this dead end by himself. So Nangongja also changed the topic and said to Mashiro, "Did you make clothes for me?" As he said that, Nangongja picked up the clothes that Mashiro put on the table. "I learned some clothes making skills from Yabuki sis. I wanted to make a few sets of clothes for you for a long time. After all, you only have a few sets of clothes, and they're already worn out. When I came here, I didn't have much to do, so I asked Liang to get me some cloth to try making some." Mashiro rubbed the corner of his clothes from time to time. He didn't have his usual calmness. Instead, he was a little panicked, like a small animal that had never seen a stranger before. "Can I give it a try?" "Oh. Of course, of course. I don't have your exact size, so I made the clothes based on my memory. I don't know if it's suitable." Before Mashiro finished his sentence, Nangongja had already put on the clothes that Mashiro made. Different from the slightly longer clothes in the past, the clothes that Mashiro made this time were shorter, and the color was very warm. Wearing it, Nangongja didn't have the cold feeling that he used to have. Instead, he looked very gentle. "Is it suitable?" Nangongja smiled and said to Mashiro. Although Mashiro's clothes-making skills were still a little rough, there were many parts that were a little rough. But Nangongja was very happy that he could wear the clothes made by Mashiro. This made Nangongja feel very warm in his heart. With Nangongro, Mashiro, and Little Linger, this was a real home for Nangongja, right? Looking at Nangongja's gentle smile, Mashiro only felt that the anxiety in his heart seemed to be expelled in an instant. All that was left was a slight warmth that warmed his heart. A thin layer of mist uncontrollably appeared in his eyes, and he felt like he was about to cry. Looking at Mashiro, Nangongja gently pressed his hand on Mashiro's head. "During this period of time, I believe that you have endured for a long time, and blamed yourself for a long time. It's okay, cry to your heart's content. I'm not only Nangongja, but I'm also your family. Whether you're happy or sad, I have the responsibility to share with you." It would have been better if Nangongja didn't say this, but when he said this, Mashiro's eyes were like a broken dam. Tears rolled down from Mashiro's eyes, and sobs came from his throat. Every time Mashiro faced Nangongro, and Little Linger said that she was worried about her brother Nangong, it was a different kind of torture and condemnation for Mashiro. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.